Yes, all right, everybody. Thank you for joining me once again. Today we're dealing with Gil Carvalho versus Dr. Ken Berry regarding some aspect of nutrition. For those of you who need to know, Ken Berry is a family doctor with, I think, 20 plus years of experience in that field who promotes what he calls a proper human diet, and he's right about what a proper human diet is. And Gil Carvalho is a bloke with a medical degree and a PhD, neither of which he has ever used professionally to any degree at all, it seems. He's never practiced medicine, not a single day in his life, apparently, and neither has he actually used his PhD in an academic sense because the number of publications in his name is about none that I can find. He's a guy with an opinion that got a couple of bits of paper and then went straight to social media without any application to the real world. That being said, let's hear what each of these individuals has to say and decide for ourselves which one it is that we would trust, I guess. Off you go.
Many viewers asked me to react to the channel Ken D. Berry MD, and specifically this video called What Will Happen If You Eat Oatmeal Every Day? Shock answer. So I took a look at it, and as usual, we contacted the creator, and to his credit, Dr. Berry was more than happy to come on and chat about it.
I'm also very happy to come and chat to you, Gil, about pretty much any of the ridiculous, nonsensical, erroneous assertions you make about human nutrition, human health. By the way, Gil's PhD is in neuroscience, not nutrition, and his medical degree qualifies him to speak about nutrition. Absolutely not at all. In exactly the way that Ken's does. However, the difference between Ken and Gil is that Ken is correct, and you are not Gil. Gil is if not himself a vegan, he is definitely a vegan sympathizer. He has been known to collaborate repetitively with folks like Simon Hill, who is an absolute imbecile, by the way, and other well-known vegetarded individuals. So, anyway, let's hear it. Oh, also, Gil thinks LDL is causal in heart disease, it seems, which it isn't. That's for another day too, though. Off you go.
So we did. You're about to see it. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys, seeing this process in real time, comparing views, going over the evidence that those views are based on, all done respectfully. So here's our conversation. Enjoy. Thanks again for being willing to talk. I think
absolutely. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, and just to reiterate kind of how we find ourselves sitting here face to face. Basically, I've gotten over the years, a lot of requests from viewers to comment on your content, to react to your content. And a couple of videos come up a lot. And one of the videos that comes up a lot is this video about oatmeal that you made some time ago. And so I took a look at it, agreed with some of it. Other ideas I found very surprising because they didn't match any of the evidence that I had seen, but before, you do an in-depth...
Gil, an ability to critically analyze and make a competent assessment of what is and what is not evidence, what does and does not make your case, is something you can only get with several decades of experience working in that field of producing the scientific literature. Your PhD certificate will not do it. And even less will your medical certificate do that. You are not competent to comment on what the literature says about human nutrition, human physiology, or any related field at all.
Maybe I have missed something.
Yes, you've missed what I've just said, Gil. You are Dunning-Kruger personified. Your incompetence in the field that you're speaking in is so vast that you are unable to see your own incompetence. I've done a number of videos reacting to Gil Carvalho in the past if people want to look those up. Basically, Gil is destitute of comprehension of the science here.
So, reached out to you, and here we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to go over some of the ideas in the video, and maybe you don't subscribe to those ideas anymore. Maybe you do. Either way, it's okay. I think it'll be an interesting exchange.
Yeah, I totally agree. And let me just say right off the bat, I really applaud you for doing this. So many of us get in our silos of what we believe and what we don't believe, and that makes the other side immediately the enemy. And I don't think like that at all, and I don't think you do either. I think what you and I are both trying to do is rediscover what a proper human diet actually is. And so I'm really thankful that you reached out and said, "Hey, let's have a discussion about this."
Yeah, but Ken, the difference is you are right and he is wrong, demonstrably, about almost everything he has to say. It doesn't make him your enemy, absolutely, I get that, or our enemy, or anybody's enemy as a person. It does make him incompetent and someone who should cease commenting on this area, because he is not a commenter, he is not a competent commentator on it.
Love it. Yeah, so just to give an example, the first idea that you have in the video, I think we agree on. Essentially, you are kind of playfully putting down this idea that oats are a superfood or a perfect food, this excessive hype out there. I essentially agree with that. I think basically superfood is not a scientific term, it's a marketing term. When it's used out there, it's used to sell stuff. There's no such thing essentially as a superfood scientifically. So this demystifying of excessive hype around certain foods as being perfect or panaceas, I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, and part of my video is in reaction to those videos that, qualify oatmeal as some kind of superfood. It's just like, this is just the best food in the world. There's no downside whatsoever. And so part of my...
Yeah, there is that which is food for a human being and part of a proper human diet, and that which is not. Absolutely.
Video, as you know, is based on just the nutrition and how it affects people with diabetes. But then part of it is just kind of a slapback answer to the people who act like, overnight oats are the answer to every single thing.
Message is brought to you by the Oatmeal Marketing Board or something.
And in preparation for that video, I know you do a ton of prep for your videos. It's obvious. I actually looked into the anthropological record on oats. And before about 4,500 years ago, no human ever ate oats in any meaningful quantity. Never. They just didn't. They didn't have the technology to process them, and so it was considered a food for horses, basically, and other livestock. And then,
and it's not appropriate for them either.
We did develop some, and in the Iron Age, it started to be food for the poorest of the poor. And so anybody who could afford to eat better would eat better. But if you couldn't afford to do better, then you would eat oats. And they came up with various ways of cooking them to decrease the phytic acid and the lectins and the oxalates and the avenin. And it became basically a fallback food or a starvation food for the poorest of the poor. And then Quaker came along I think it was 1877, and they started the Quaker Mill Company and started milling oats. And then later, I think 1900 and 1901, they started the Quaker Oats Company, where they kind of conglomerated a bunch of different companies into one big company and started really making oats in earnest. And even then, if you go back and read in the history, oats were still considered a fallback food. If you couldn't afford bacon and eggs for breakfast or whatever, then you would eat oats, and that was better than starving. And I totally agree with that statement, that oats are always better than starvation. 100% agree.
Depends on how long the so-called starvation goes on for, Ken.
And then some of your viewers may already know, but PepsiCo bought Quaker Oats in 2001, I think. And so PepsiCo, they tend to buy foods that have very specific criteria. And I think it's telling that they decided to buy Quaker Oats at that time.
Just to touch on something that you said initially, that oats started to be, that the first evidence appears 4,500 years ago. There is a study out there going back 30,000 years for oats consumption. Now, the quantification is always difficult
Right.
with paleoanthropological data, but that's the oldest one that I've seen is 30,000. And then for whole grains, in general, 100K plus. For I think sorghum is the oldest one that I've seen.
Right, right, and so that's exactly correct, and that's been found at one time in that one specific location that there was some evidence that suggests that they were eating oats in some meaningful quantity.
And that's the difference between a competent scientist who understands that a small scale study based in one geographical location at a given time does not inform on what human beings did at large across the globe over deep time. Just there it is, right there, an example of someone who happens to have some scientific nous, Ken Berry, up against this other individual who simply does not and thinks he's being clever and making good points.
But there are a couple of anthropologists who have a problem with that study, saying that the oat residue could have shown up for many other reasons. But I'm happy to give you that humans in one location around the entire world ate oats at that time 30,000 give or take years ago.
Never give these guys anything, Ken. Not a damn thing ever.
Yeah.
But like you said, the quantification, that's hugely important. And oats were never eaten in any meaningful quantity, at least as far as the evidence, before about 4,500 years ago.
Yeah, the discussion about paleoanthropology and what our ancestors ate, I find it fascinating. I had a full, like a 1 hour long, 2-part interview with a professor of paleoanthropology who dedicated his entire career to studying ancestor diets. So I think it's fascinating. And researching for that was one of the most fun videos that I did. But
yeah, I think it's not only fascinating, I think it's.
Do you see how Gil Carvalho just said absolutely nothing but, yeah, I just interviewed a guy? So what? I've interviewed lots of people too, Gil. So has Ken.
Actually,
but not me often enough, Ken. Hello? Get me on your channel, please. Let me talk to your people. All right?
Vital to truly understanding what human beings should be eating, because every other animal on the earth, every other mammalian species that we deal with, we know exactly what they should eat. We know exactly what they should avoid. It's not up for debate in the veterinary sciences, right? Cows eat grass. That's known. And so many people don't even think, even dietitians and doctors, they don't think about archaeology, anthropology, paleoanthropology.
Most of them don't think at all, Ken. Most of them mindlessly regurgitate what their training told them to mindlessly regurgitate. They put their feet on the yellow markers on the floor, they paint within the lines, and they do as they're told. Otherwise, they get struck off the medical register or the dietitian's register or whatever it is. There's no thinking involved.
That doesn't even enter into their mind when they're saying, "Oh, you should eat a bowl of steel-cut oats every morning for breakfast. It's a superfood." They have given zero thought, and so I love it that you understand that's obviously very important if we're going to be having public opinions about what humans should eat and what they should avoid. We should probably look back into the past and see what have humans been eating the longest. What have they been eating for hundreds of thousands of years? What have they?
Millions, in fact.
They've been eating for thousands of years. I think that's.
Well, humans and pre-humans. It's about 4.5 million years that we've been eating almost nothing but flesh of animals and the associated animal fat. And not so much the organs.
Very important and very telling, because there's this principle in biology called adaptation.
Hear that, Ben Bickman?
You adapt to something the more generations you're exposed to it. And so there are certain foods that we've been eating, our ancestors have been eating for over 2.5 million years.
And I think it's more like 4.5, Ken, but fair enough.
And so obviously,
what's 2 million years between friends?
We have adapted thoroughly and completely to that. Not only
hear that, Ben?
To the point where we can tolerate it, but that it actually is beneficial. And then there are other foods, and in my opinion, oats would be one of those. We've only been eating that for just a few hundred generations. And then the predominantly the poorest of the poor were who were eating that, and they often didn't reproduce. And so I don't think when we look at the history of oats, we get a really strong signal that they are, obviously we both agree they're not a superfood. We can both agree on that right now, I think. But then I have problems with oats being part of most people's regular diet, especially people with prediabetes, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, obesity, fatty liver.
Two of those things, Ken, are constructs. Two of those things are things that are made up things. Pre-diabetes is a made up thing, for example. And there was one other example you gave there. It's gone out of my head just now. It doesn't matter if something that's a made up thing. Okay? No.
I think in those situations, you probably should not eat oats unless you love them, and then maybe have a bowl for your birthday.
Have something that's bad for you on your birthday, Ken. No.
So hopefully we're going to touch on several of these aspects and go over evidence.
Oh, here we go. Evidence. Yeah, go on, Gil. Tell us all about evidence, even though you are not competent to assess what is and what is not evidence at all.
These questions. Just to kind of wrap up the ancestor part, my view is a little different. I think looking at what our ancestors ate is hypothesis generating. It's a very interesting thing to research. I think we can ask questions based on it. Okay, it seems like our ancestors ate X, so maybe this is a food that has a certain health outcome. I think that is not a conclusion. That is just a departure point that we then test with.
How are you going to do that, Gil? How are you going to attest the effects of dietary interventions of some kind in human beings over multiple decadal periods under control and observation? How in the purple fuck are you going to do that, son? Shall we wait for that? I think we'll be waiting a very, very long time. I won't push the button for the crickets.
With actual human beings, modern human beings, with the foods that we have available, and we observe what health effects are documented and with statistics and with everything.
Documented with statistics. Statistics don't prove anything by themselves, Gil. Only an appropriate and competent assessment of a data set can do that. And most assessments undertaken in most of the literature around human health are not that. Not even remotely close to that. Sorry about that.
So I think that's a valid point. I would tweak that just a little bit. Would you suggest that the statement "cows should eat grass" is that just a hypothesis generating statement, or do we have has that experiment been conducted for enough millions of years that we can probably conclude without lots of new modern nutrition research that cows should eat grass? I think evolution, which is the ultimate long-term controlled experiment, there is no longer term experiment than evolution. I think we can conclude cows should eat grass. And I think that'd be very hard to try to defend the opposite point of that. But I take your point.
Yeah. So just to address that real quick, and then hopefully we'll get into the specific health issues. One difficulty establishing the parallel is that, for example, in the interview that I had with a paleoanthropologist, one point that he made repeatedly is uncertainty in the record. So there are enormous gaps.
Ever heard of stable isotope testing, Gil? There is absolutely no equivocality at all about what human beings did definitely consume for at least 100 and something thousand years immediately prior to the last 11 or 12,000 or so, i.e. pre-agrarian revolution. The facts are in, it is not equivocal. We know what the diet of human beings was. Fact.
Gaps of knowledge in the paleoanthropological record in terms of ancestor diets. Another point he made very insistently was diversity, that our ancestors ate an enormous diversity of foods, depending on what they had available.
No, they didn't. False.
And so,
Sure.
No, that's not what the stable isotope testing establishes. It establishes absolutely unequivocally that human beings ate almost exclusively the flesh and associated fat of animals. Fact. All over the world, all human remains found everywhere over about 11 or 12,000 years ago, with one exception, an isolated study of an isolated population of folks that lived in the Andes somewhere about 15,000 years ago who were already eating quite a bit of grains. So they're a pre-agrarian revolution, small-scale population. I think it was an N equals 12 study or something ridiculous like that too, by the way. All other stable isotope testing conducted on human remains of all ages up to 100 and something thousand years old found anywhere on the planet all tell the same story within 5% Gil.
I think this is something that most people agree on, that we are able to survive on a variety of diets.
Yes, because human beings have developed a system which is at least malleable enough that we can survive things that other animals can't. But so what? We're talking about what the ideal diet for a human being ought to be, and that should be based on some kind of evidence. Stable isotope testing is that evidence. Still.
And so then the question becomes kind of optimal. What is optimal? What reduces risk factors for chronic disease and for the...
No, and then you go completely off your tits and start talking about risk and risk factors. No such things are extant, Gil. There are no studies on human beings that can inform on the risk of any health outcome of any kind as that relates to any dietary intervention or eating pattern of any kind whatsoever. Not a single study exists that can inform on risk or risk factors. No.
The main killers of our society, and that is where I think looking at ancestral diets is weakest, is in terms of predicting higher or lower risk of chronic...
No studies can inform in any way, either way, on risk still.
Chronic diseases, which arguably is the main concern for Westerners that have survived.
Yes, chronic disease is the major concern for most Westerners. The underpinning etiology of chronic disease, the big killers, is clear when you understand physiology, Gil. There is no question as to what the cause is, nor what the solution ought to be. And Ken Berry has it absolutely smack nail on the head correct. A proper human diet, which is obligate hyper-carnivore. Fact. Still.
Survival kind of guaranteed.
Yeah, and I think your guess that you're referring to was exactly right. That humans we are omnivores. There's no doubt.
No, Ken. No. Well, depends on how you define omnivore, carnivore, hypercarnivore. Because I mean, a carnivore is an animal that eats any amount of other animals of any kind. A hypercarnivore is over 70%. Humans absolutely are that. An omnivore, I suppose, could be defined as any animal that eats any amount of both animals and plants. So yes, you could say we're omnivores, but ideally, we're no such thing, Ken. Ideally, if we followed a species-appropriate, species-specific, proper human diet, that's hyper-carnivore, which you could still say is an omnivore diet. If there's any plant material at all, fine. But I think that gives the wrong message, Ken. Okay.
About that. We have always eaten whatever we need to eat to not starve to death. But there are a few foods that are ubiquitous in every single time, every single culture that we've looked at. There are certain few foods that there is always evidence, yes, the humans were eating that. And that food would be meat. I don't know of a single study in anthropology or paleoanthropology where they didn't find stable isotope analysis that the humans were eating meat. Now, there are many studies where it's clear that they were not eating C3 plants at all. Others, they were not eating C4 plants at all. But in every single study that I've ever read, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, I've never seen a paleoanthropological study looking at stable isotope analysis where there was not obvious evidence that our ancestors were eating meat or seafood at that time. And you may know of studies I don't know about, but I've dug pretty deep, and I can't find a study that does not show that they were clearly eating meat, including seafood.
Yeah, I don't think it's controversial at all that our ancestors ate whatever animals they could find, they would eat, and whatever
Sure.
edible things they could find that were nourishing, they would
Yep.
eat. I don't think that's controversial at all. I think maybe
But in the same vein, there are many of those studies that show that they were clearly not eating these vegetables or not eating these plants.
90-something% of the fruit and vegetables available to humans today at your average greengrocer, supermarket, or wherever else did not exist a couple of hundred years ago. They are all human inventions.
The C3 and C4 plants, the way they photosynthesize, that you can actually see that in the stable isotope analysis. And so I think that very commonly it's painted, oh, we've always eaten this rainbow of things. And
yes, I was just saying the other day to Pim, my lovely partner, geez, we better have something sky blue pink today because I'm definitely deficient in sky blue pink.
Like, no, we've always eaten meat, and then whatever plants that we could digest, whatever
almost none then
plants were available, but without exception, we were always eating meat.
Yeah, I think the biggest divergence here would be what would our ancestor diets tell us about the health effect of foods. My view is that they tell us relatively little in terms of long-term health effects of eating different foods. And I think
no less than the current literature, Gil, which is unable to inform on this question whatsoever still. However, when you understand that evolution is a thing, Ben Bickman, and does inform over deep time, Ben Bickman, then you understand that millions and millions of years of eating a particular kind of food will lead to adaptation in that animal to the eating of that food. Okay? This isn't difficult to understand, especially if you have 2 advanced degrees. One in neuroscience and the other one in medicine, apparently, even though you've, as I say, never particularly used either of those certifications usefully.
I think with going over the specifics and the data, for example, on oats, will address some of these questions.
No, it won't.
So if we get into one of the first questions that you brought up in your video that I found surprising was talking about spikes, the glucose spikes and the insulin spikes, which is interesting to talk about because there are so many questions about this nowadays. And so the idea very briefly was that you're definitely going to notice if you start eating oatmeal every day is a big spike in your blood sugar and your insulin. Both of these are going to cause problems in your body.
So one thing you're definitely going to notice when you start eating oatmeal every day is a big spike in your blood sugar.
It's different when the voice has been a bit processed there, isn't it, Ken? Other than the terrible, I presume, Zoom connection that's going on there.
And a matching spike in your insulin levels. Both of these are going to cause problems in your body.
So I don't know if, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I don't know if
Well, you just did, kind of, didn't you? By taking a short section of something Ken said out of context of the entire presentation that he made on that day at that time. And as such, you might well be doing just that.
Still subscribe.
That's why when I respond to people's videos, I respond to the entire video from start to finish so that nobody can say you cherry-picked any of that. Okay?
To this, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I think for a significant percentage of people, if they have a big bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, and this can be either steel cut oats or the processed quick oats, or just the highly processed flavored oats like the maple honey syrup oats, you're going to have a significant blood sugar spike.
God, really? You eat something that's basically a starch consisting of a lot of glucose molecules wanged together, and the amylase in your body starts to break that down in your mouth before you even start to swallow it or start digesting it actually, internally. And pretty quickly it releases a lot of that glucose into your bloodstream, and there's a spike. Who'd have thunk it?
And I will freely admit that there is a subset of the human population that it's not going to be a meaningful blood sugar spike.
Well, who's to determine how much is meaningful?
I think that's absolutely true. If you're young and very muscular and very metabolically healthy and very active, you can eat a bowl of oatmeal, especially steel cut oats, with no banana, no maple syrup, no sugar, none of that stuff. And you'll have a blood sugar elevation, but it's not going to be meaningful for you. If you watch
at that time, Ken, perhaps on that one occasion, but repeat that daily, even if it is a mild excursion, what's the likely outcome then?
Much on my channel, you realize that I talk to metabolically ill people. That's
and mentally ill people, those who are watching your channel from the veganerized point of view, that is, Ken. Because you've got quite a viewership of veganerized individuals still, haven't you? As have I. They think I'm great, by the way, the vegans. They love me, all of them. I've never heard a negative comment about myself from a vegan. It's great. I've been very lucky in that regard.
Biggest listener base. And so people with prediabetes, people with type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, people with hypertension, metabolic syndrome, hypertriglyceridemia, fatty liver.
Metabolic syndrome was that other thing, Ken, that was a made-up thing, a construct. So insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, they're both constructs, okay?
Obesity, severe obesity. That's the audience that I'm talking to. And so for those people, and let me just say, Gil, initially, early in my medical practice, I believed what...
Yeah, that's another difference between yourself, Ken, and Gil here. The fact that you've actually ever had a medical practice.
What I don't, you haven't stated your belief, but I believe that you believe that oats they're a fine breakfast. They got fiber. They've got...
Fiber's bad for you.
A little bit of protein. They've got a tiny bit of unsaturated fat.
Unsaturated fat's not a good idea. Well, excluding saturated fat from your diet, because when you eat animal fat, there is an amount of unsaturates with that.
They've got some vitamins and minerals in them, although I would argue that many people don't have access to those because of the anti-nutrients in the oats. But I just thought, yeah, oats are fine. Just don't put a ton of sugar on it. And but I have come to change that belief as I have practiced through the decades.
Again.
And then also as I delved into modern nutrition research, and then especially when I started looking at the archaeology and anthropology. So, yeah, I believe there's a significant portion of let's just say the U.S. adult population. Let's just keep it at that, so that we've got a population of people we can talk about. I would opine that 88% of the U.S. population should not eat oatmeal regularly.
I would up that number to 100%, Ken.
As a breakfast, because...
Yeah, 100% of people should not do that.
Because they already have at least one marker of metabolic syndrome.
No, just a construct.
And so they are going to have a much bigger blood sugar spike and then a subsequent insulin spike, because that's how human physiology works. And that is going to cause glycation to cells and tissues that is detrimental to health. And so does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm just trying to organize, because there were a lot of points. So one key distinction here is between someone who's not diabetic, who's healthy, who's physically active, lean, or, reasonably healthy. We could use our example, maybe, or someone like me, or whatever makes sense, or like you, or whatever makes sense. Another kind of world would be someone with type 2 diabetes, where I think different dietary strategies make sense, and we can talk about that specific scenario. So I think it makes sense to separate this. The reason that your statement, and in general the video, I found surprising, is because all of these statements in the video, or virtually all, were very categorical. I don't remember any of these statements saying, if you have type 2 diabetes, then here are some concerns, and here's some way you can tailor your diet. In general, the statements were...
What is the cause of type 2 diabetes, Gil? Oh, yes. That's right. The cause of type 2 diabetes is the consumption of contraindicated and unnecessary exogenous carbohydrate. Period. So why should Ken distinguish between someone who has already crossed that line and caused themselves that pathology and someone who has not yet done that? Either way, the amelioration for the diseased population and the prevention for the non-diseased population is the same. And the intervention required is stop pouring carbohydrates down your stupid fucking neck. Period. What's next?
You are definitely going to see this. You are going to have problems. Your blood pressure is going to.
Yeah, those kind of statements are not helpful. You are going to do this. You are going to do that. This is definite for you. No, the science doesn't back any of that. Never has.
It's like you're this or you're.
But what you're doing there, Gil, is setting up a straw man attacking Ken on some verbiage he might have used in a video back when that may not have been ideal in terms of its robustness, its ability to withstand refutation of any kind. What you're not doing is providing us with any reason whatever why anyone should ever consume exogenous carbohydrates. So keep an eye out for that, everybody, as to whether Gil is able to at any time justify any reason why any human being should do that. We'll be waiting a long time.
You're going to get fat on oatmeal. That's what I found most surprising.
Yeah, no, that's not a helpful statement because a lot of people will eat a lot of oatmeal and not become obese within any given time frame. However, what will be happening is the damage that starts to lead someone towards the predisposition to that. That's definite. The rate at which any given individual person will experience damage is a bit individual, yes. But the mechanism of the damage, the way it happens, will happen to everybody at some rate or another.
So I can explain my reasoning behind that. Most young, healthy, fit, muscular people who don't have metabolic disease aren't doing YouTube searches.
People who have an intolerance to the intake of carbohydrate, what you're referring to as pre-diabetes, Ken, and people who have diabetes, Ken, type 2, these are not people with metabolic disease. These are people whose physiology is working absolutely, perfectly, correctly as per the plan. What is not going to plan is their diet, which is wrong. For goodness sake.
Is oatmeal good for me or not?
No, it isn't. We're done.
Right. And so I tend to try to make videos that people are searching for. And so people with metabolic syndrome and other metabolic diseases, they are much more likely to type into the YouTube search engine, is oatmeal good for me or not? And so...
right, so it's the difference between being a social media influencer, which Ken is very, very successful at, with millions of subscribers, millions, and his occupation as formerly, and I think still currently, a family physician, but also his other sideline of coaching. It seems mostly coaches to coach others actually these days, and giving them messages that work for purpose. And there are no human beings who do better by pouring a bunch of carbohydrates down their necks than they would do eating a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. Well, again, that's one of those definite statements. There are one or two people around the world who have very serious issues that lead them to an inability to eat meat, for example. Alpha-gal is an example. People that have been bitten by the Lone Star tick. That can be a problem, for example. I'm talking about people who don't have those issues. The general population. Okay? Again, statements on social media about what's good for people and not are generalized, Gil. They are not individualized advice. Okay?
yeah, there are some categorical statements in that video, and that's
What is categorically true for the vast majority of people. And I don't think that's a contraindicated thing, Ken. I think that's fine myself.
because I assume that if anybody's watching a video about is oatmeal good for me or not, they probably have a few markers of metabolic syndrome, and therefore,
Again, no.
they probably fall into the category of people that we were talking about previously.
So I wondered about that. I wondered if this was just a kind of an internet compartmentalization, because in my channel, I don't have that experience. I have people from all walks of life, from people who are very healthy to people who are very sick. But I specifically wondered if this was the case. Maybe your audience, maybe you targeted to a certain audience and you didn't even bother to specify that you meant a certain population.
Yeah.
So,
And then also, Gil, you know as well as I do that there are millions of people, and we'll stick to U.S. adults. There are millions of U.S. adults who have undiagnosed prediabetes and undiagnosed type 2 diabetes and undiagnosed metabolic syndrome, correct?
No, not correct.
I mean,
There are millions of people who are poisoning themselves unnecessarily in a contraindicated fashion by pouring carbohydrates down their necks in huge amounts on a daily basis. That is the correct statement.
if you look at the epidemiology, even on the American Diabetes Association website, they'll admit there are millions of people with these conditions who are,
And yet, that same organisation will tell those people that a good idea is to pour ever more carbohydrates down their stupid fucking necks. The very thing that led Ken to start the alternate Diabetes Association, and I support it fully. May it succeed.
undiagnosed. So now we've got 88.
The American Diabetes Association are basically criminally misanthropic in their advice they're giving to people. They are telling people the solution to an inability to metabolize carbohydrates, which they shouldn't need anyway, is to pour ever more of those in. The very thing that will absolutely lock in and determine that their lifelong need to be a diabetic and to be in the Diabetic Association and to be a good customer for them is assured. It's criminal.
8% of the adult U.S. population with at least one marker of metabolic syndrome, right? That's in the literature. And now we've got these millions of others, and this includes teenagers and young children as well.
A person whose metabolism is functioning absolutely according to how it should, according to their genetic instructions, Ken, is not a syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a construct, and it's a false one.
Who have undiagnosed prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, metabolic syndrome, and they're already overweight or obese. Well, what's the percentage of that in teenagers now?
I'm told in many US states that the rate of obesity is north of 50%, even in children.
It's pushing 50%. So I would argue that, what is it, maybe 3% of the U.S. adult population who shouldn't watch my video about oatmeal? It's a very low number, right?
so what we'll get.
Everybody should watch everything Ken Berry has to say about the proper human diet, and everything I have to say about it too. Because guess what? If Ken is ever unsure scientifically, guess who he asks?
To the people with the metabolic issues and what's
Even if you won't have me on your channel, Ken.
specific dietary change makes sense there, because I think that's a specific discussion that makes sense. I just wanted to share on, as I was trying to get to this, because I wondered about this, if it was a population thing, if it was maybe the compartmentalization of your audience, I took a look at the reactions to the video. So for example, this person commented, I started eating oatmeal for breakfast 6 months ago.
Okay, so this is supposed to be a discussion about the science. And you're going to the anecdotes, the comments that people leave on the video. Gil. What are you trying to achieve here?
I add nuts and cinnamons and banana and a couple other things. I'm hardly hungry at all at lunch. My cholesterol is down. My A1C
Cholesterol being down is not a good thing.
improved. My bowel movement is more regular. I feel better at 62 than at 32.
Well, so what?
Another guy said, for 60 years, I've been eating oatmeal every morning. I've never been sick. I'm slim with no medical problems.
So what?
These were some of the top voted comments on your.
So what? Good sciencing there, Gil. 2 anecdotes that other people enjoyed. I thought we were going to talk about the evidence.
Video. Among the top 5 or so comments, several were people who anecdotally were disagreeing with the message in the video. Now,
so fucking what?
Of course,
I don't have that problem on my videos because nobody disagrees with any of my things on my videos, do they ever, kids? It's all positive all the time.
With anecdotes, we always have to be extremely careful and not assume cause and effect.
And indeed, with almost the entire body of literature concerning human health as that relates to any aspect of dietary intervention of any kind, because that's also nonsense too, Gil. Universally.
For any of these factors. But I was just wondering if this was something that it was an audience thing, but it seems that the viewers
Jesus, can we move on?
who watched this video found these comments to be among the most helpful.
People like good news about their bad habits, Gil, that's why. And carbohydrates are particularly a problem for people in terms of addictive behaviors. So anyone that says, oh, I've been eating this particular poison for years and it hasn't killed me yet, is going to get upvoted by people who are as dumb as 2 short planks. So fucking what?
And the most, the ones they related to the most.
So what?
I suspect and I suggest for you to consider that many people are watching this video and ending up confused.
Gil, do please absolutely guest on my channel and come and have a debate with me, Sunshine, about science. This is going to be fucking hilarious. Because you're so far out of your depth, it's laughable, son. You really are. Sorry about that, just the facts. This is not my usual act. This is not my usual, I'm just telling the facts here. You are absolutely, utterly destitute of the first clue, aren't you? Correct me wrong. Front up.
Or surprised by the message. By the way, the other top comments were, I'm beginning to wonder what the hell I can eat.
So?
Doesn't matter what I eat. Doesn't matter what I eat. Somebody's bound to say it's bad for me.
So?
This video helped me tremendously, ... not to listen to strangers on the internet.
So? Mindless, ignorant, arrogant opinions and anecdotes from people with no idea what they're talking about.
Telling me oats are unhealthy. These are like the top 5 to 10 comments were all like this.
So? Still?
Or, let's say 2 out of 3.
Let's just make up a number then. Good. That's why you fit in so well, or think you fit in so well to the so-called science around nutrition, Gil, because just making up numbers is okay. No, it fucking isn't. It's not science.
So,
and that video has, 11,000 comments?
Yeah, but the top voted by your viewers.
Mm-hmm.
So, not by your viewers, by anyone at all who may or may not have viewed the video at all, not 1 second of it, perhaps. Think of that? No, because you don't think, do you, Gil?
So that's
right.
So I wasn't sure about this either. So that's why I looked at the reactions of the viewers themselves.
Because you have no idea how to actually look at the evidence for yourself and make an informed decision based on that. You'd rather take the anecdotes of people with no idea what they're talking about. Good, Gil. Good work, son.
I didn't want to be like, I might be coming from a point of view of a, a priori belief.
Yes, you are.
But I think it's defensible that the viewers of that video are in a substantial...
So all you're doing is repeating yourself over and over and over again, Gil, trying to make a point that falls absolutely, utterly flat on its stupid face in the most destitute fashion possible. It's ridiculous, son. As are you.
Proportion, disagreeing or finding this message, surprising or objectionable. Now, I get that I do make YouTube videos too. We get lots of comments and lots of strange things that people say. I'm just bringing up the possibility that making these categorical statements, but really meaning people with specific conditions, might confuse a lot of people. But I don't mean this.
Well, I understand.
Coming from a bloke who has no background whatever in human physiology, other than that of neuroscience in particular, and a standard MD's medical training, which neither of which you've actually used, as I've said, you're casting aspersions, you're projecting. Ken Berry at least has decades of experience at the coalface. And you do not, Gil. You do not at all. You have no place talking about what is confusing or not confusing. None whatsoever.
Yeah, and I take your point. The majority of my views come from the United States, even though I have a large viewership in India and Australia and other places. So if we go back to the current state of metabolic health for U.S. adults, if 88% of people have at least one marker of metabolic syndrome, so we know now that leaves only 12%. And then we also know from the research that there are millions more who have undiagnosed metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, hypertension, fatty liver, obesity. What would be just your educated guess?
He's not educated. He's indoctrinated in two fields, neither of which he has any practical experience in applying professionally, Ken. He is not an educated individual. He's a buffoon with a caricature that he plays on the interwebs, making himself out to be an expert in fields that he is not. Okay?
As to what percent of the U.S. population, if we were able to magically do an A1C, a lipid panel, and a fasting insulin on every single adult.
The lipid panel is not going to give you any useful information whatsoever as regards carbohydrate metabolism.
Human in America.
Or anything else.
What percentage of U.S. adults do you think are perfectly metabolically healthy? They don't have a single one of those things, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. What percentage would your educated guess? What
He's still not educated.
Would it be?
Oh, we have estimations in the U.S. Perfect health without a single marker of metabolic syndrome. It's a very small percentage. It's less than 10%. But I would disagree with the premise of that question. The implication there, and we haven't gotten to that, so we'll get to the actual facts.
Oh, I doubt that very much from you, Gil.
But while I agree that oatmeal or the absence thereof can be personalized for some of those conditions, like type 2 diabetes, we'll get to that in a second. For several of these markers of metabolic syndrome, not only don't think that oatmeal is necessarily problematic, but I think we're going to go over evidence that it can be.
So now you want to argue whether oatmeal is problematic for a bunch of factors which are put into a construct called metabolic syndrome, which is still nothing more than a construct. How is that going to forward our understanding of anything whatever?
In some settings, I'm not trying to make blanket statements, but in some settings, beneficial, specifically for people with some of those conditions. So we're going to go over the data so it's not just me spouting opinions.
Yes.
Well, that would be nice. Let's see some data that proves a damn thing about anything, Gil.
Sure.
But so to touch on the type 2 diabetes population specifically, and then we'll come back to...
Right, well, who's in that and who's not in that? Because it's a threshold decision made by the allopathic medical community as to who does and who does not have type 2 diabetes with a hard cut-off value. Ridiculous much, isn't it?
To the spikes, which I think is really interesting. I think it's completely reasonable in a population, someone with type 2 diabetes, to moderate or time out the foods that cause an abnormal glucose response.
Right, so that's carbohydrates then, isn't it, Gil? Carbs are the problem, so stop doing that. Good.
So in fact, I've done this in my own family, even people who had, for example, who were diabetic induced by medication, for example. They started a new immunosuppressant drug, became hyperglycemic essentially overnight. Massive abnormal response to oats and some other foods.
What does that have to do with the generalized population? Other than nothing, whatever.
And in fact, we timed out those foods. A couple months later, switched back to meds, normal glycemic again, went back to eating oatmeal with a completely normal glucose response. So I think that's a very reasonable strategy.
Who's to say normal is indicated or optimal, Bill?
The nuance there, or the additional thing to mention, is that for most people in the US, in the West, the root cause of diabetes is not going to be medication. For some it is, but the majority, it's going to be an excessive visceral fat, an excessive adiposity.
No, those are symptoms of the problem, Gil, not the cause of it, you buffoon. Absolute rancid, ridiculous, pustulous nonsense from you.
Causing insulin resistance.
Wrong. Insulin resistance is a construct and it's not a pathology. The actual phenomenon which you are falsely referring to as insulin resistance. Utter nonsense.
And then eventually diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And
I know that's one of the prevailing hypotheses, but that's obviously never been proven to the point, it's never even been supported to the point where that's actually a theory. That's still one of the many hypotheses of what causes diabetes.
The cause of diabetes is the thing that causes a person to have elevated blood glucose. And that is the consumption of unnecessary and contraindicated carbohydrates, period. That is the cause. That is also the solution. Stop fucking doing that.
Isn't that correct?
no, it's the most supported.
Yes, it is correct, Gil. Ken has been absolutely correct there. There is no proof whatever of what you are describing as one of the causes of diabetes. None at all.
By far idea in terms of pathoetiology of diabetes. Roy Taylor is the guy who conducted a lot of the research. So if you look at...
Name dropping won't change the facts, Gil, and the facts are Ken has just correctly stated there is no evidence extant to support the claim you've just made. None at all still.
Weight loss studies.
Weight loss studies have nothing to do with diabetes necessarily, Gil.
Pretty much on any diet under the sun, from low carb to high carb.
And now we know you're just making shit up. There it is right there, kids. You've been caught out, and now you're just talking at 1,000 miles an hour to try and dig yourself out of a hole. And you're just saying words. It's pathetic.
Everything in between. You can put diabetes in remission, improve metrics of insulin resistance, as long as
still a construct.
There's weight loss. So this has been shown.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't think it's ever been shown that it's actually the weight loss itself that is reversing the type 2 diabetes. I don't think we've ever seen the causal mechanism or link there. And that's why I said it's a very popular hypothesis, and it probably...
It's popular with people who believe that you should avoid fat and eat a bunch of carbohydrates, which you shouldn't do. Sir Philip Randall established this in about 1962 or 3. We've known it that long, actually. And some of us understand the Randall cycle and what it implies and doesn't imply.
It has consensus support from all the experts.
Experts, you say. X is somebody that used to be something that isn't that thing anymore, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. We're not interested in experts. We are interested in correct, valid, robust discussion about what the science can and cannot inform us on. Still.
But I don't personally believe that, and we can go into why I don't believe that. It comes from my 22 years of practicing family medicine.
Yeah, how many do you have, Gil?
What I've actually seen in the trenches for 22 years as to why I don't believe that's the case. But yeah, I agree. That's a very popular hypothesis of what causes type 2 diabetes, but I don't believe it's correct.
And you are correct that it is not correct. Absolutely, obviously, patently and clearly to anyone who understands human physiology at all.
Okay. It can certainly be uncoupled from macronutrient composition because you can put diabetes in remission on a variety of macronutrient compositions. I think there are factors, for example, caloric intake. We can't really uncouple.
Oh, for fuck's sake, seriously? Calories, you say now, Gil. And the intake of them. Well, that's physically impossible. You cannot intake calories. See, Gil doesn't even understand basic premise, the basic premises of physics as we understand it. Because if he did, he would not say that people are intaking calories, because they're fucking not.
Caloric intake from excess adiposity. It's very difficult. So yes, it could be the chronic energetic excess, or it could be the adiposity itself, or a mix of the two. I guess those two.
Well, that's all you ever do on any topic, Gil, is guess.
To be causal anyway. So, but yeah, if we get into the details, it could be either of those two. Yeah.
Or it might be something completely unconnected to either one of them. Did you think of that?
But I think we have a lot of evidence that it's not any specific macronutrient.
No, that's false, because type 2 diabetes is diagnosed as an elevation in the fasting blood glucose over a certain threshold level. The cause of elevated glucose in the blood is the pouring of unnecessary and contraindicated carbohydrates into the blood. Still, that is the cause. It's also the solution. Stop fucking doing that. Still, I don't get why this is difficult. I really don't.
We could get into that, but
then we always, as a practicing physician, I have to always come back to the question, okay, how do we diagnose diabetes?
With fasting blood glucose level over a certain threshold as determined arbitrarily by the medical council. That's the only way. That is what the diagnostic criteria is. And that alone.
We diagnose diabetes based on an elevated blood glucose reading.
I love it when a plan comes together and Ken says exactly what I knew he was going to say.
Or an elevated hemoglobin A1C, which is a record of chronically elevated blood glucose.
Careful, Ken. It's actually more an indication of repetitive high levels of spiking more than it's anything to do with an average level of blood glucose or fasting blood glucose.
right.
We can also do a 2-hour glucose tolerance test, which again is looking at elevated levels of glucose in the blood
After pouring in contraindicated and unnecessary glucose. So it's still not a pathology. It's the human physiological system functioning exactly as it should.
Yeah.
And so that's the definition of.
See, the whole premise here that's absolutely and utterly false from the ground up, from these retarded, vagunarized fuckturds, is that we should be able to consume as much carbohydrate as we like, pretty much. And if we are healthy and normal, our bodies won't react negatively to that. Absolute fucking rubbish. Wrong. The proper human diet contains basically no carbohydrate to speak of. So why would you want to be... It's like saying, well, a properly functioning human body should be able to handle all the cyanide I like. I should be able to eat cyanide all I want to. Both are toxins. Both are poisonous. Of course, it's the dose that makes the poison and the strength of that poison that determines what dose makes it poisonous for any given individual, sure. But exogenous, excess, contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates and cyanide are both toxins. Why should a healthy system be able to take in any amount of either? For goodness sake.
Diabetes, type 2 diabetes. That's how we define it. That's how we diagnose it. So I guess it feels a little bit odd to say, well, it's about calories.
Well, calories, you say, no, calories have nothing whatever to do with human metabolism. Nothing at all.
Paucity. Well, it's a blood sugar excursions and blood sugar being constantly elevated to the point where it's damaging your body. And so if there is a food like oatmeal that causes a significant blood glucose excursion, then that's probably not good for you.
Very good, Ken. Excellent.
I think that's common sense. And then, regardless of your current, BMI or your current any other measurement, if you are metabolically unwell, you do not want to eat any food that causes a significant blood sugar excursion.
And if you are apparently healthy, you still don't want to eat a food that is likely to lead you towards that propensity at some point in your life, depending on your genes, the environment in which you place those genes, and the level, amount, frequency, etc. of contraindicated, unnecessary, toxic carbohydrates that you pour down your stupid fucking neck.
And increases your rate of glycation. That's the way I look at it. Now, that could be, you may disagree with it.
Well, you can disagree with that at your own folly, because it will actually point out what we've all been saying all along, those of us with any clues about anything, Gil, which is that you're a fucking imbecile, aren't you?
Not fundamentally. I think
exactly my point. Fuck me. Oh, go on, Gil.
For people with type 2 diabetes, we've stated our positions, and I think we agree that ideally, I think it's a completely reasonable strategy to.
Now, what about the millions of people with pre-diabetes? Do you also agree with it in that context as well?
Well, there's no such thing, is there? It, again, is a construct. It's a diagnosis based on someone with slightly elevated fasting blood glucose, but not to the threshold level that makes them actually diabetic suddenly at that point. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
If it causes...
These are people who are, as we would expect, reacting negatively to pouring poison down their stupid fucking necks. Aren't they? They're just not at that level where the medical profession says, now you're a diabetic. But they are suffering the exact same thing at a lower level, which is a toxic reaction to the toxin. Carbohydrates. Good.
Foods that cause... Same logic. Right. Foods that cause...
Okay, and then also, one more question. I'm sorry to interrupt. What about the...
No, you go hard, Ken. You keep him under control because he's a fucking idiot.
Millions of people with undiagnosed prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Would you also agree in that context as well?
Yeah, but if they're not diagnosed, how are they even going to be minding these things?
Well, if they watch Ken Berry's channel and mine and Dr. Chafee's, because he's another really good one on this, then they'll understand why they shouldn't be pouring any amount of carbohydrates to speak of at all down their necks ever.
Well, that's right, but the glycation's still happening whether they're diagnosed or not, isn't it? If they have undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, they're going to have a huge blood sugar excursion from eating oatmeal, and that's going to cause glycation and permanent damage to every arteriole in their body, correct?
Yes.
Good. I think we're done here, aren't we? But somehow we're not even halfway through this. It's incredible, isn't it?
This is not magic. That's not when the damage begins. The damage begins usually years, if not a decade, before the diagnosis is made. And so basically my video is a preemptive warning to anybody who has any symptom or sign of metabolic syndrome.
Only what you should really do is generalize your statement to the population at large of all human beings, Ken, which is that the intake of exogenous carbohydrates is unnecessary at best and absolutely contraindicated more likely in almost all people. Fact. And you've outlined the facts as to why that is in the last few minutes, irrefutably. And Gil's agreed with you. So we're actually done with this so-called debate. It's going to be fascinating to see what comes up in the second half, isn't it? See you then. Let's do it now.
Oatmeal's probably not the best breakfast for you.
With metabolic syndrome, I disagree. We're going to go over the specifics like
What do you disagree on, Gil? Because you just agreed absolutely, unreservedly with what Ken just said, which is you pour carbohydrates down your neck and they will cause glycative damage. Almost certainly. So we shouldn't do that. The need to take in carbohydrates from exogenous sources in our diet is not 1 single gram ever. Fact. Why are we not done with this discussion? What more is there to say?
Well, with type 2 diabetes, I think we essentially agree that it's a reasonable strategy. The only thing I would add there is that...
And pre-diabetes as well, right?
Diabetes, yeah, same logic, yeah.
Okay.
Good. So we're still in agreement. Good. So what's your problem, Gil, other than stupidity?
The only thing I would add is that the key there, because weight loss and fat loss is the most consistent trigger of diabetes remission that we have in the literature.
No, trigger infers cause and effect. It's still a symptom of carbohydrate toxicity. Okay?
And because that can be achieved on a number of diets, and because we see the most consistent observation in these trials is that people lose weight on a variety of diets over 6 months, and then the majority of people put the weight back on and go back to being diabetic after a year or two.
Okay, and which of those was the cause and which was the effect? Because the best way to put weight on is to start pouring carbohydrates down your stupid fucking neck again. Ergo, A, you regain the weight that you lost, and B, the diabetes comes back. The solution is still, stop with the fucking carbohydrates, isn't it, Gil?
The key factor for me seems to be sustainability of the diet.
Oh, right, so people are weak and pathetic. Ergo, we should give people poor advice, knowing them to be weak and pathetic. I think we all know who it is that's weak and pathetic here, Gil.
And so different people, I think we have that experience. Different people are going to find different diets sustainable and doable. I have viewers, for example, who say that a low-carb diet helps them maintain healthy body weight. And if they add carbs, they can't do it. I believe them. I have viewers who say the exact same thing about low-fat diets and who put their diet.
That's because both of those kinds of diets will intervene with regard to the Randall cycle issue that's causing the problem. The difference, of course, is that one of those diets is absolutely destitute in terms of its ability to provide nutrition for a human being, and the other one is not. So it's really easy which one we should pick. Really straightforward.
Diabetes in remission on low-fat diets. And many others, I think statistically, we can say from trials, that the majority of people over the...
You clearly have no idea about statistics whatsoever, Gil. I've proven that time and time again in my reactions to your videos hitherto. You've got no business talking about what the statistics say, because you've got no idea what they say.
The long run, have trouble sticking to either of those very, very kind of extreme restrictive.
I have trouble sticking to a lifestyle where I'm not drinking consistently, smoking marijuana, and masturbating furiously, Gil. It's difficult for me not to do all of those things. Nonetheless, I realise the importance of it, and I discipline myself somewhat. What is your point?
Diets, and maybe different diets like Mediterranean or other versions may be more sustainable long term. So I just think that's important to bear in mind. But I agree that for someone with type 2 diabetes, like I've had cases in my own family, that in that interim, while the root cause is being addressed.
Yeah, but Gil, you don't know what the root cause is, clearly.
It's a completely reasonable strategy to time out these foods that are causing an abnormal glucose response.
Right, so carbohydrates still. Good.
We're going to get more into the specifics of metabolic.
So you keep saying we're 35 minutes in terms of your video time. We're still waiting.
Metabolic syndrome, because I think there it gets more interesting. Wanted to bring up some things with glucose spikes. I think you're, of course, abnormal glucose spikes in the context of diabetes. I think we both agree that's bad news. Glucose spikes in a normal individual. I never had diabetes. I eat some oatmeal. There's a glucose excursion. The body distributes that glucose. The glucose comes back down. Do you think that's a concern health-wise?
Well, it depends on how long the excursion is
and how often
and how frequent these excursions occur. Wouldn't you agree? What does your personal blood sugar do when you eat a bowl of oatmeal? What's it go up to?
Goes up by 30, 40 something points. So maybe from 80 to 120 something, maybe ballpark.
Yeah.
And
so in your case, you're one of the rare people that probably can enjoy. Is that an oxymoron? Enjoy a bowl of oatmeal?
I always enjoy poison myself, Ken. It's great. Well, depending on what the poison is.
I don't know, but I think
that's how many poisons get you, of course, by being pleasant.
I think you're someone who could eat a bowl of oatmeal and it's not consequential.
Yeah, no one bowl of oatmeal is going to kill any one individual unless they have an anaphylactic reaction to oats. We're talking about what people do consistently and persistently over time. We all have a tolerance for behaviours that are not apt to produce the best possible health outcomes for us. Yes. But surely the best advice to give people is generalised advice that says the ideal situation is this is how many carbohydrates you should consume every day. And the answer to that question is basically none. Still.
But I think there's a large percentage of people that it is consequential. Anybody who eats a bowl of oatmeal and their blood sugar goes above 140, and granted, that's an arbitrary cutoff that medicine has been using for decades to say, whoop, that's too high, that's a problem. And
because glycation is going to occur at that level at a much more rapid rate than it would at 120.
I think you would agree as well as I do that to the degree that your blood sugar is elevated, you're going to be causing more glycation in your body. I think that's just a kind of a basic rule of physiology. I think the higher your blood sugar, the more you glycate. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And so in your case, I think it's fine. Now, let me just give you a little background about me, because this might be relevant, actually.
Yes, I think you should give him some health advice. Absolutely, Ken, because one of you is actually a practicing physician. And the other one, as I've said more than once, not.
As to why I think like I do. I used to be severely obese. Back then we called it morbid obesity. My BMI was 32, and I was pre-diabetic, and that's kind of where I started as a family physician on this journey. It's like, crap, that's bad. I can't have that. And so basically in my reading to try to fix my own body, that's how I have come to everything I talked about in my YouTube videos. And so I'm someone, I haven't checked it lately, but I bet with a CGM, I bet my blood sugar would still go to 150, 160 if I eat a 1 cup serving, which is that's the classical serving you talk about of even steel cut oats. But I might do that here in the next few days just to see if I still, because you don't have much of an excursion. And I do know that you're correct that there are some people who previously were very type 2 diabetic, very metabolically sick, and had just an insane excursion when they would eat a bowl of oatmeal. But after they got healthier, lost some weight, got more metabolically healthy, they didn't have nearly as high of an excursion. That's absolutely, that makes perfect physiological sense.
Yeah, so we're going to touch on glycation because I think we have some difference of views there. Glycation, of course, with very high glucose levels, chronically, it causes hemoglobin A1C, glycation, but it doesn't seem to be linear. So I think there's just a slight difference there.
He never said it was linear, Gil. You just said that. Putting words in his mouth, the very thing you said you weren't going to do. At no time did Ken suggest that the glycation damage, commensurate with high blood glucose, is linear.
It's not as simple as the higher the glucose, the more glycation there is.
It really is. It's just not a straight line. It's curvilinear.
Might be a threshold at some point, but we'll go over the data on glycation.
So you keep saying we'll go over the data. We haven't heard a single bit of data from you. Let's hear some data.
If we have time.
Sure.
I just wanted to point out something you said specifically about the 140 cutoff. That's for 2 hour postprandial time point.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
With a healthy individual, if my glucose goes higher than 140, at some point, I'm not worried about it. As long as by the 2 hour mark, I'm not at 140.
Yeah, sure. Fine.
So I know you know this, but people at home, oftentimes this is...
Yeah, you're correct that's the 2 hour cutoff for a glucose tolerance test. But if that's abnormal 2 hours after a glucose load, which is typically 75 grams, then why would it not be abnormal in any other situation?
Because by that time point, the body has brought down the glucose to normal levels in a healthy individual.
Yeah, but it hasn't prevented the damage that was done by that huge glucose excursion, which happens anyway. because that's concentration dependent more than it's time dependent or exposure dependent.
So that's a cutoff that you're not supposed to be that high 2 hours after. It's completely different 15 minutes or 30 minutes after, where you expect a glucose excursion after, for example, a bowl of oatmeal.
Carbohydrates. Yeah.
Sure, depending on the glycemic index.
But that doesn't mean it's okay or that you should have that. Saying that something happens normally does not make that thing the ideal or the most health-promoting thing to do.
But
Sure.
I don't think my glucose.
It's normal to be obese and pre-diabetic and with metabolic syndrome and to be unwell. That's normal. Does it make it right or the most healthy thing to be?
Glucose goes up to 140 after a bowl of oatmeal. But if it did, I wouldn't be particularly worried about that either. But
Yeah, you're probably supported.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but you're probably supported by the evidence and not worrying about that in your particular case. But I.
Well, let's wait till Gil is your age, Ken, and see which one of you looks best at that age in terms of glycation damage and obvious signs of aging and health in general.
Am worried about a blood glucose excursion above 140 at any time after ingestion of any meal. And so I don't think 140 becomes magically bad at 2 hours. And I understand your what you mean by saying, 2 hours later, if it's still high, then that's obviously a problem.
But it's just obfuscation, Ken. It's just nonsense from Gil. And you're being way, as I've said to you more than once in reviewing some of your discussions of these kinds, you're being way too conciliatory, in my view. At the end of the day, you are right and he is wrong. That's what we should keep in mind.
But it's still glycating, even if it only goes up to 140 at the 30-minute mark and then starts to go back down. I think that from the research I've seen, and I'm happy to be shown wrong, the research that I've read.
So am I, but I'm waiting for it to happen from anybody on anything meaningful ever. Perhaps you can get the job done, Gil. It looks like from all evidence, not just in this video, but in all the other videos I've seen of yours, that won't be happening. So
it's pretty much linear. And I think at the lower glucose levels, it's probably not as robust. But when you get above 130, 140, 150, I don't know of any research that shows that that's somehow not more glycating than a blood sugar of 90.
We'll go over the glycation data and the A1C data. Yeah.
Again, we will go over the data, says Gil. Great, let's do that.
I think maybe we've seen different data because I have not seen data that glucose excursions in a healthy individual cause.
How do you define that?
Like meaningful glycation or meaningful differences in A1C. But we'll go over that specifically.
Okay.
Well, A1C is just a gross measurement over time, and so can't really inform on that issue to speak of. The minute level, getting down to the bricks and mortar and seeing what causes what is the work that needs doing.
Just wanted to share something real quick that I found was interesting, but maybe we agreed on this already. You've heard probably that exercise causes glucose spikes as well, right?
Sure. Because you exercise and your liver dumps some glucose into the blood, ready to subserve the need to supply the muscles with blood glucose, which is required to reform muscle glycogen in between muscle twitches. So of course that happens.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was curious about this, and I was wondering if the magnitude was like a completely different range from diet, or if it was similar. So I pulled some traces.
Actually, there's two situations where you'll see kind of anomalous blood glucose excursions, and that's with intense exercise, but also with fasting. If you fast for a past 24 hours, you'll often see an elevation in blood glucose as well. But typically in those situations, you don't see it go above 140. And also there's a difference in the glucose and the body's need for glucose, because in a severe exercise situation, your body's actually releasing the stored glycogen, and in other ways, your body is making the glucose go up.
Yeah.
It's not that glucose excursion is not being caused by what you ate. It's your body is demanding that glucose. And so I would opine in that situation that that's going to be much less glycating, because that glucose is not going to circulate for a long period of time. That glucose is going to be used immediately because some part of your body demanded that glucose, and your liver's happy to oblige, and your muscles. And in the same respect, when you're doing a longer fast, a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day fast, your blood sugar might elevate, but that's because your body's demanding that. It's not that you've stuffed yourself with so many carbohydrates that your body can't help but have a blood sugar excursion.
So I think this curve might be interesting, specifically with regards to the idea that in the setting of exercise, the body takes up the glucose immediately, and in the setting of eating, it doesn't. So if I can share the screen real quick.
Imagine a world where creativity and technology combine.
Can you see those traces?
Yes, I see it.
Right. So the grain of salt, because this isn't publication quality, I took these 2 traces from separate studies. So grain of salt there.
Right, so it's a load of rubbish then. So the whole comparison here is not worth doing at all.
I was just curious if the range, if the magnitude was similar. So this is just over time glucose level changing. Just for fun, do you want to...
In 2 different populations undertaken in 2 different studies by 2 different sets of researchers, probably under completely different conditions, probably.
guess which one is exercise and which one is oatmeal?
Tell me which one is which.
The blue is exercise. It almost doesn't matter because I'm sure...
How much glucose is being released on the basis of how much intake of carbohydrates, of what kind, under what circumstances, in what population of people at what time, versus the same questions about the exercise.
Sure, if we repeated each curve, we'd get some variation there. So,
Yeah.
Here, I don't think one curve is obviously taller or longer than the other. I was just struck.
It also looks like the blue line has many more recording points in it than does the green line, because the green line is a bunch of straight lines separated by about 3 or 4 points only.
Struck by their rough similarity in scale.
Yeah, but the rough similarity and scale is meaningless on the basis that the comparison itself is not apples with apples, pears with pears, it's fruit salad.
To be specific, just to give you the details, the exercise is a cardio, 15 minutes on a stationary bike, intense activity. So I just thought it was interesting that the curves are somewhat similar, and this doesn't...
the green curve is definitely from oatmeal.
Oatmeal, yeah, overnight oats, yeah.
Gotcha. And so in this person that this curve was taken from, neither of these gives them an excursion above.
So these are both n equals 1 as well? Is that what we're talking about? Another reason to completely discard it?
130.
Sure. Yeah.
So in this metabolically healthy person, I think that curve, that's exactly what it would look like. But you would probably agree that in somebody with metabolic illness, these curves would probably look significantly different.
It would definitely look different depending on the illness. But for example, diabetic person, the oatmeal curve would likely look very different. Not just the magnitude, but what's more important, the length of the curve. The curve
That's
would
right.
be abnormal.
And also in people with prediabetes as well, correct?
Yeah, just not...
Right, so basically the whole point there, Gil Carvalho, was absolutely ridiculous, and Ken Berry's just pulled your pants down and spanked your silly little ass. Good work, Ken.
Not an extreme, but essentially, yeah. I don't know what the curve would look like for exercise for a diabetic person.
You don't know dick about fuck, Gil Carvalho, basically. Let's be fair.
But I think that data is out there. I just don't remember exactly. But so in this setting, it seems like we are agreeing in this setting, the glucose spike is not a problem. And then at some point, a glucose spike that is either...
When did Ken Berry ever say a single blood glucose excursion on any one occasion was problematic for anybody? He didn't. Still.
Very high. We may disagree on the exact cutoff, but a glucose spike that is extremely high or that is very long, like in the setting of diabetes, then that's bad news. It sounds like we're roughly on the same page.
Yeah, right.
Right. So a person who is overtly expressing a toxic reaction to toxic carbohydrates versus a person who is not overtly expressing that toxicity, but nonetheless taking in the same toxin is different somehow. The one who's not yet exhibiting the toxic traceable effects is just not yet. If they continue to behave in a way that's likely to lead to that, then at some point, as sure as little green apples grow on little green apple trees, that's what you'll probably find. What is your point?
Roughly, I agree.
Okay. So yeah, just go back to, because my whole thing went crazy when I did the screen share.
Your whole thing went crazy, girl, when you imagined yourself to be remotely competent to publicly talk to people about their health, nutrition, and anything related to that. You are not competent to do so.
Stop share. Okay. I just thought that was interesting, and I think a lot of people, you've probably seen this, but a lot of people will be surprised by these traces.
Nope. They're of no interest whatever.
So yeah.
And let me just
Meaningless noise.
let me be very clear. I've checked blood glucoses in tens of thousands of people, and I have seen young metabolically healthy people who could literally drink a 16-ounce Pepsi, eat 4 jelly donuts, and a bag of Doritos, and their blood sugar go to 110. I've seen that in young metabolically healthy people. Absolutely, there are people who can currently tolerate that. Now, I think we're blind.
A person who does not tolerate that level of toxicity is not less metabolically healthy than the one who does at that time. Both people's physiology is working appropriately.
To the fact that in those people, if you were also checking insulin levels, I think that you would find that they would be having a marked insulin excursion, which me and my colleagues would call a hyperinsulinemic event, which I think is also a problem for long-term health. But yeah, there are many people who are young and metabolically healthy who would have a curve that look like you showed on the screen, just eating pure, high ultra-processed sugar junk food.
Yeah, and I think this is progress, and I think this is relevant information, because I do get questions from people who are being told or maybe understood that any change to their glucose level is pathological. That I think they associate this with diabetes, because in our minds, glucose goes up. We tend to associate this with, oh, I'm becoming diabetic. And so this is a question.
Nobody has ever said, nobody that knows anything about this has said that a single blood glucose excursion on any one given occasion is going to cause a problem long term, depending, of course, on the magnitude of that.
Should associate it, because that's how you...
I mean, there is a level of excursion of sugar that will cause a problem. If it gets too high, you will lose consciousness and die.
Define and diagnose diabetes, but I agree with you that not every glucose excursion is pathology. I totally agree with that. With the obvious examples of intense exercise or prolonged fasting, you're going to have a blood sugar excursion. That's not pathology. That's physiology. I totally agree.
Yeah, and
so is the body locking sugar out when it's contraindicated, thus meaning it cannot exit the bloodstream via the normal route, thus meaning that the blood glucose level chronically creeps up, leading to this pathology called diabetes type 2. For goodness sake.
I would add eating a food with carbohydrate, particularly food with whole carbohydrate,
Okay, so theology, rubbish, nonsense, pseudoscience, absolute garbage there, Gil Carvalho. Total fucking garbage.
Food that causes a glucose excursion in a healthy person, I would classify that as completely normal physiology, not a concern. So I think we agree on that, and we also agree that at some point it becomes pathological, and the exact cutoff might be debatable. But I think this is. I think very, very good, very interesting. So to touch on, let's touch on glycation because you brought that up several times.
Yes.
So hemoglobin A1C, I looked it up first in the setting.
So you looked it up. Goodness gracious.
Of the oatmeal intake, just in general, and then some general trends with diet and hemoglobin A1C. I'll try to go over this quickly so it's not boring and too long a monologue. So the idea that you stated in the video was your high blood sugar from eating the oatmeal is going to start to glycate all the cells in your body, and then you specifically refer to A1C.
Your high blood sugar from eating the oatmeal is going to start to glycate all the cells in your body. You may have heard of a test called a hemoglobin A1C.
So I looked at trials that measured A1C, randomized trials with or without oatmeal, basically depending on.
And what were the other controls that were exerted? Were they two genetically identical, phenotypically identical populations at the outset? Or was it a randomized crossover trial? What was the level of control and observation of these people? How many of them were there? What were their demographics? All very important questions before we can even start to look at the utility, let alone the veracity of what you're about to say about the study that purports to have looked at A1C.
On the trial, and there are quite a few, you either see no significant difference to A1C or a reduction of.
Significant according to what? On the basis of what? What do you mean by significant? Because significant in science, Gil, means statistically significant. Very, very small results can be deemed significant statistically if the sample size is large enough, and very, very large changes can be deemed insignificant if the sample size is small enough. Okay?
A1C on the oats, including trials looking at diabetic individuals.
According to whom, on the basis of what?
Now, one question is, what are the oats being compared to?
All right.
Is a huge question in nutrition. So a few trials look at oats versus eggs, for example, which is an interesting comparison.
Well, maybe it is an interesting comparison, but it's not a scientifically valid one, is it? No.
We have a lot of these for things like blood pressure and body weight, a lot of those comparisons. For the A1C...
Yeah, but not with adequate controls which are robust and valid in a scientific sense. This is theology, Gil, undertaken by pseudoscientists looking for things to publish in order to further their careers as academics. Nothing whatever to do with informing people on what is of utility and veracity for them to know about.
One trial that I saw looked at that. They found no significant difference in A1C between
So what?
oats and eggs.
So what?
I would grain of salt there, not just because it's one trial, but because this trial, I have some concerns with the way they structured it.
But why mention it at all then, buffoon? It's not an indication that is of utility or veracity of any kind one way or the other. You are wasting our fucking time. You're wasting our time pretending to be remotely competent to talk to people about nutrition, health, or physiology, let alone science. Clearly.
They added a bunch of other foods. So grain of salt.
So don't bother. Don't waste our fucking time then, Gil. So you've got no evidence of any kind to point to. Fantastic.
And so this is what I've seen.
So you're still going to tell us what this useless drivel, this pile of excrement that you're calling science, suggested to you in your reading of it. Why, Gil? Why would we be interested in that at all?
Looked pretty extensively. We couldn't find a single trial where hemoglobin A1C went up on the oats interventions. If you've seen one...
Because there are no adequate controls being exerted, Gil. That's the reason for it. And the sample sizes are too small. And the observation is not disciplined enough. And the whole thing is theological claptrap nonsense and garbage.
I would love to look at it.
Yeah. Do you have a graphic of this? I didn't know if you were going to show. I didn't know if you. I thought you were going to show something. That's fine. Okay. No.
Right, so he showed nothing. He gave us an opinion on some stuff that was garbage, and he even told us it was garbage, to attempt to obfuscate and divert people's attention away from the fact that he's been absolutely spanked, pillar to post by Ken Berry about absolutely everything he's had to say.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
I can pull up
So-
show like a forest plot or something. But no, I
Oh,
didn't
got a forest plot. Okay, good. Let's see a forest plot, shall we?
have like a great image like
Right,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't going to make a point. Yeah.
Gotcha. So several points here. First of all, as you know, and I'm sure you readily agree, doing nutrition studies in human beings in the wild, so to speak, right, in their natural environment is just nigh impossible. In order to get the power that you need to say, yes, this actually showed that, in order to restrict their diets enough to know that you're not getting confounders, in order to control for all the other variables, it's just virtually impossible. And I mean, I've had multiple people who do nutrition research for a living on my channel for interviews.
But not me, Ken, for some reason. Even though I'm the bloke you come to ask for advice when you're not sure about something. Starting to piss me off, Ken. Invite me on your channel yesterday.
Who readily admit that. It's like, yeah, this is really the only way you can ever get meaningful nutrition research data is if you control every single variable. And you can't. And so a lot of these studies will say, oh, we controlled for obesity, we controlled for, smoking and this and lifestyle.
Rubbish.
But what people don't understand is that the way you control for that is you use a mathematical formula, which was basically it's based on a model. And
That's right. It's called multivariate regression. It's fabrication of data, because scientists control things before they collect data. They collect the data under control and they report what they observed. That's the process of science. Not ignore the process of science, don't control anything, whatever, just collect data willy-nilly and then adjust that data according to your belief about what the data would have been had you controlled. No, not science.
so we're like, okay, we think that this is going to control. And so we have no idea of knowing if that calculation in reality actually controls for that. And
Exactly, because a multivariate regression is just a series of single variate regressions superimposed over one another. No one regression of that kind is able to inform one cause and effect, not one jot. So stacking them all up on top of each other will not have that effect either. It's based on a number of assumptions, including a lack of collinearity. Interesting, isn't it? Because that's the first assumption, and it's violated every single time in these studies.
And so there's like we could talk for 6 hours on the problems with modern human nutrition research. And so I'm actually glad you didn't have a graphic to show from that, because the first thing I would ask you is who paid for the study, because human nature being what it is, you know as well as I do that matters.
Yeah.
So the question was on the A1C. And so my biggest problem on YouTube is that I'm fighting against people who say things with authority, such as overnight oats that's it. That's gonna cure your diabetes. That's gonna reverse your diabetes. That's gonna make you lose weight. It's been shown in studies that it's gonna help you lose weight. It's gonna lower your A1C. But in real people, that's often not the case, and that's the majority of my audience is just real people who are just trying to say, okay, what should I eat for breakfast, dude?
Steak and eggs and steak. That's what you should have for your breakfast. Delicious.
So that I can get my A1C down, get off these medications, reverse my type 2 diabetes. And so part of my video was in answer to that. No, oats are not a superfood.
Or indeed a food at all for human beings.
Also, oats in many, many people, and you said maybe 92% of people, and I would say we're probably pushing 95% of the U.S. adults, they're going to have a significant blood sugar excursion if they have a bowl of oatmeal.
Why do you think there's been such a resistance to allowing the general public to go to a store and buy a continuous glucose monitor and use it on themselves? Who is it that's been resisting this and trying to make it illegal for so long, I wonder?
And then the other problem is that what many people hear when these influencers say you should eat oatmeal every day, not even that it's a superfood, but there's research that shows that it's going to lower your A1C, or there's research that shows that fiber is going to help you lose weight.
There are no studies that can inform you on what you can expect to occur when you do anything. None.
Right? What the average person who's not a nutritionist, who is not a nerd like you and me, who
speak for yourself,
who's reading 10 or 20 nutrition studies a day, they don't hear, okay, in a well-formulated diet with regular exercise, eating a normal serving size of steel-cut oats without adding maple syrup or sugar, they don't hear that. What they hear is, oh, okay, oats are good. So I can eat oats. And so what they wind up doing is eating Quaker's strawberries and cream instant oatmeal because oats are good. And
which they're not.
Or they wind up putting a bunch of honey or sugar or something like that in their oatmeal.
Because they're listening to Paul Salad, I don't know.
Because oats are just good prima facie. Oats are good.
But they're not, still.
Eat oats. And so they don't get the full picture. And so I'm happy that, look, I watched my video before we went live together. Mm-hmm. I'm happy that I was so really outspoken about the oats, because my main goal is to get people to think about their health and to think about the foods they eat. And so calling out oats, maybe a lot of people will actually take their box of Quaker strawberries and cream oats and turn it around and look at the nutrition facts and then say, holy crap, this is full of sugar. And then my answer to that would be, yeah, it is full of added sugar. But
also the oats themselves break down to the same thing, sugar.
And also the majority of the carbohydrates in the oats are starch in the form of amylase and amylose and amylopectin, which are broken up immediately in your mouth into glucose or maltose before you even swallow the oatmeal. And then when you swallow it, your pancreatic amylase is going to break it down even further into it's literally just pure glucose. That's what the majority of the carbohydrates in oatmeal are. And so I love it when people start to think about that. And that's really my primary goal. Because like I said earlier, when I was a young physician, I had no idea about all this stuff. If you'd asked me what enzyme breaks, the starch in oatmeal, I could have got amylase because I learned that. But I would have had no idea about the maltase and the other enzymes required to break down all of the amylose and amylopectin in oatmeal. I just wouldn't have known that, but now I do. And so many people just don't know that. But where I first started seeing a signal early in my medical career is when I would tell people, oh yeah, eat your oatmeal, put some bananas in it. And then they would come back in. And back then we didn't have CGMs. We just had the finger prick glucometer, right? And they would come back in and they would say, I tested this. And an hour after I ate that bowl of oatmeal, my blood sugar was 195. And then 2 hours after, it was still 150. And I was like, that's weird. Oatmeal has fiber in it. That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. But it's this almost magical belief when you hear somebody that you respect say, oh, oatmeal is good. Oatmeal will help you lose weight. Oatmeal will lower your blood sugar. People they take you at your word. They don't.
How can something that breaks down almost immediately to nothing but the form of sugar that we find in our blood, how can that possibly have the effect of lowering your blood glucose, for fuck's sake?
don't realize that there's so much nuance. And that's why I'm such a huge fan now of continuous glucose monitors. Because if somebody watching this right now thinks, I think Dr. Berry's full of shit, right? Or alternatively, I think Gil's full of shit.
The latter.
Get a continuous glucose monitor, put it on, and eat that big bowl of oatmeal and watch what your blood sugar does. Does it go above 140? How long does it stay elevated? How long does it take for it to come back down? So if you watch any of my other videos, you know this. I'm a huge proponent. I want people to check and verify because, as you said earlier, there's young, healthy people who can probably eat a bowl of oatmeal and have no metabolic consequences whatsoever.
For how long can they continue to do that before it starts to be a problem, obviously? And how much damage have they already done by that stage where it becomes obvious that is irreversible?
But I would opine that 92% of adult Americans, in your estimation, 95% in my estimation, they are going to have a significant glucose excursion, which is going to cause unnecessary, unhealthy glycation.
Fact. Good. Bam. Mic drop. Still.
And so, just like every other thing when it comes to human nutrition, it's complicated, right? That's the answer.
It really isn't, though, when you get your head around it.
For virtually any question in human nutrition it's complicated. But that's
a cop-out.
I just wanted you to understand my thinking and how I've progressed from being the guy back in 2003 who would be like, yeah, don't eat that instant oatmeal. You eat steel cut oats or rolled oats because those are, the kind you have to cook for 3 days. Those are good for you. But I didn't realize back then that steel cut oats have exactly as much starch in them as the 1 minute oats. Now, the 1 minute oats have a little less fiber, right? And they're going to probably cause a higher blood sugar excursion because of that, but it has the same amount of sugar in it. And if you're metabolically unwell, it's going to spike your blood sugar and it's going to cause unhealthy glycation. Does that make sense?
I'll touch on a couple of the things, and I'll try to
just say yes, Gil, and apologize to your audience for misleading them for so many years. Misleading them that you are remotely competent to comment publicly on anything to do with nutrition, metabolism, or human health, really.
Not to be too long. Just a slight correction. When we said 90-something% of people are metabolically unhealthy.
No, they're not. Diabetic's metabolism is doing exactly what it ought to do. It's not that they're metabolically unhealthy. They are unhealthy because they are in a toxic situation. Still.
That does not mean that 90-something% of people are going to have a high glucose spike, an excessive or abnormal glucose spike. 95% would be.
So you're just guessing as to what people's responses are going to be.
Anyone that has any of these metabolic syndrome factors, but some of these, as we'll cover, can actually be alleviated.
You keep saying about what you're going to cover, Gil, and you haven't covered a damn thing. Not a single fucking thing. In an hour of discussion with Ken Berry, nothing at all have you brought to the table. Zero.
Created by Oats. So I think people that we agree are going to have an abnormal glucose response would be people with diabetes, pre-diabetes.
The Mo is calling. This Movember, unite to take on.
And there we're talking about 15, 20, 30% of the population.
Absolute fucking nonsense.
Really.
Absolute fucking nonsense.
So these numbers depend where we look. Worldwide, 5% of people have diabetes, 9% pre-diabetes, so total is 14%.
This discussion was clearly, absolutely stipulated to be about adult Americans, Gil.
In the US, of course, it's worse. 11% of people have diabetes and roughly 1/3 have pre-diabetes, so total is in the 40s.
And how many are undiagnosed who would be in those categories, as Ken Berry has correctly alluded to? Still.
People with high blood pressure, people with some of these other conditions, they would be included in the 90-something%, but I don't think that there is any compelling science for someone with hypertension, for example.
There's no compelling science about any projected health outcome, heart health outcome in human beings over any period of time related to any dietary intervention of any kind, Gil. Still, none at all.
To avoid oats, and we're going to touch specifically on the data if we.
So you keep fucking saying, where is this data you're going to keep fucking touching on, Gil?
I understand that you believe that. I would disagree with that, but I think they're both rational positions to hold. But it's different when you're the doctor in charge.
Yes, because one of you is a doctor.
To the patient's care, and you're seeing their CGM tracings, and they're asking you questions. That makes it a little bit more.
That's Ken's polite way of saying, and you ain't ever done that, Gil, because you've never practiced a single day in your life as a medic, have you?
Binding in that scenario. Go ahead.
Well, again, way too conciliatory there, Ken. I think you should have smacked him straight across the face with that. Yes, son, and you've never been a doctor, have you, is what you should have said.
The curve is abnormal. I agree there's an argument there. But yeah, so I think there we are reasonably clear. I just wanted to touch on a couple of the points that you made.
Sure.
Well, you're getting a hiding here, aren't you, Gil? You really are getting an absolute spanking from Ken, which is what I expected.
This point about the nuance and that you're trying to kind of present the counterpoint to the exaggeration that oats are perfect and a panacea. I would gently suggest that your video doesn't come across that way. To me, it came across as an exaggeration in the other direction, that oats for everyone are going to be poison.
Well, all exogenous carbohydrates in the diet, Gil, are demonstrably and unequivocally toxic. Of course, the dose makes the poison, yes. But anyone consuming any reasonable amount, let's say over about 50 grams per day total carbohydrate, will cause some toxic response of some degree. That we know for a fact.
In fact,
at some point, fait accompli.
You wrap up the video by saying oats are a terrible food for human beings.
Because human beings evolved on meat and animal fat, not oats. And he's right to suggest that they're a terrible food for that reason.
My point is that oatmeal is a terrible food for human beings.
Correct, Ken.
That's not nuance. That's not just American, just metabolically sick. That's a pretty clear categorical statement.
And he's correct. Still.
So I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just
and
come and try and give me a hard time, Gil. Please. I'm waiting for you.
Yeah, no, I take your point, and I would reply that up until Quaker Oats, through their marketing campaign, painted oats as a healthy food for human beings, I think the vast majority of human beings would have agreed with my final statement that oats are a terrible food. You should only eat them if you're starving to death.
So this is a factual idea, and so going through the evidence is going to answer that, and we already started to. So
we're nearly finished. And you keep talking about the evidence you're going to go through, and you haven't produced a single thing. Still.
Real quick to touch on a couple of things that you said. You brought up the uncertainty of science and these, I think you were referring to statistical adjustment models and multivariate adjustment models. There might be a misunderstanding. All the studies that I cited for hemoglobin A1C, they're all randomized trials. So these aren't epidemiological studies.
How do you randomize a trial when you fail completely to control and observe over any period of time, Gil? It's impossible. You're lying. Fucking knock it off.
Population, splitting them randomly, assigning oats to one of them. There is no
to a mixed diet. You are adding oats to their diets, which is already a mixed diet.
Depends on the trial. So,
right, so there is no standard here by which we can claim any science has been done, or from which we can make any statement about the meaning, veracity, or utility of any of the findings of any of those so-called studies, Gil. Good.
In cases you're adding oats instead of another food. In some cases you're adding, it depends on the exact design.
Right, so there's no science there. Good.
Which is wanted to clarify.
And so obviously the people in that study, the other foods that they were eating would also have a tremendous effect on their blood sugar. And so I feel like the reason that the studies you're citing were actually designed and performed was because the researchers thought that oats were a magic food. They thought they were going to have some astounding effect. Why else would you waste research dollars saying, okay, I want you to eat your regular diet, but we're just going to add a bowl of oatmeal a day and see what that does? I mean,
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
yeah, they're already eating 100 other foods, but adding a bowl of oatmeal it might make a difference that's slightly statistically significant, but that's not going to do anything to their overall health. Just adding a bowl of oatmeal, as in the converse argument, if everybody who watched my video, Gil, if it scared them and they're like, oh crap, oatmeal's poison, which I didn't say, by the way.
You should have said that because it fucking is.
But it's fine.
Recently, they've even identified a whole new list of toxins found in oats. So it absolutely is toxic. Yes.
And they stopped eating oatmeal.
What is an oat, by the way? Where does that come from? And is that the sort of thing the plant would like you to eat? Destroy and eat, that is. Chew it up. And no, it isn't. I wonder if the plant has any techniques for defending itself, given that it's rooted to the spot and can't run away or hide from you. I wonder if plants do anything to, I don't know, make that stuff toxic for animals.
If all, 2.5 million people who watched that video, if they stopped eating oatmeal and never ate oatmeal again for the rest of their life,
That would be a win.
it would not impact their health negatively at all. It would impact the profits for the Quaker Oat Company, but it would not impact those people's health at all if they never ate oatmeal again, because as you and I agreed, oatmeal is not a magical food. It's not a superfood. It doesn't have any meaningful nutrition in it that you can't get from 1,000 other foods. It's just one of many thousands of choices on the supermarket aisle, correct?
you can remove oatmeal from a diet and still have a healthy diet.
Right, so the exact requirement for the intake of oatmeal is none ever. Good.
But it is not true that someone removing oatmeal necessarily is going to experience no difference or no detriment. It depends what they eat.
Well, hang on, Gil. What proven health maintaining benefit has there ever been shown to be contained somehow within oats? Shall we wait for that? You're pathetic, son.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, agreed. I totally agree.
We're going to cover more data.
So you keep fucking saying. We're still fucking waiting.
Hopefully we can get going through some of this stuff. Last thing, I just want to touch real quick on the funding. You brought up the funding. I did look at that because I suspected you were going to ask. There are plenty of studies that are funded by oat-related industries and plenty of studies that are not, that are independently funded.
You mean the ones that just don't tell you where the money came from? Because science isn't free, Gil. If you'd ever done any, you'd understand that. Who has money to pay for people's science careers? Oh, yes, industry. All right, good.
Took a look. There's no difference in kind of balance of evidence and direction of effect. It doesn't seem to.
And then I'm sure you would not mind if I tell your viewers that just because it wasn't officially funded by an oatmeal company doesn't mean that one or more of the researchers weren't being individually compensated by oatmeal companies. That's also a possibility that perhaps would not filter into the final disclosure at the end of the study.
Yeah, but we can hypothesize that in both directions. So
that's correct.
Yep. So again, not really any point to any of that.
For example, in the studies comparing oats to eggs, all of those are funded by the egg board and by the egg industry.
Yep.
So I could look at that with a sort of a conspiratorial mindset and say, oh, so they wanted the eggs to look good. They looked about equivalent for most metrics except cholesterol. So the oats are
Cholesterol is not a metric of interest.
probably better than eggs, and they just fudged the data.
Yep.
That's not
human nature. You know as well as I do that if you fund a study, you're not going to just completely make up the results, but you're going to want to have a little input into the results. And that goes for the egg board, the oatmeal lobby. Everybody does that. That's human nature. And again, one of the many reasons why I recommend that people don't just blindly trust any of the modern nutrition research. It needs to be tempered with common sense, and then also with the ample anthropological evidence of what people ate in the past. And so I would opine that if oats were somehow just over and above good for humans, they would have caught on and become very, very popular 4,000 years ago. And they would have just like in the wealthy would have been wanting to eat those oats. They would have not given those oats to the poor people. They would have taken those oats for themselves if there were any kind of objective, evidence that you could see with somebody's health. You would be like, oh no, look how healthy these poor people are. I'm going to take their oats away from them. And we, in fact, don't see any of that signal at all in the historical or the anthropological research. And so I'm glad that we agreed that oats are not a superfood. And I'm also glad that we agree that if you removed oats from your diet for the rest of your life, there would be no detrimental effects.
I don't entirely agree with that. But that's
Okay.
Well, tell us what benefits we can expect from eating oats then, Gil. If you disagree, give us the rationale.
Okay.
We can agree to agree on one. Yeah. Let me just
I'm happy you tell me what would happen to somebody if they removed oats from their diet for the rest of their life. What negative health effects would they suffer from? What vitamin
Good, Ken. Good question.
or mineral deficiency? What fatty acid or amino acid deficiency would they suffer from?
Outcomes. Yeah, we're going to go over more outcomes.
Okay.
So you keep fucking saying, son. We are still fucking waiting, aren't we, son?
Now I've got a thing
God, this boy is pathetic. He really is an absolute waste of skin.
coming up at 1:15, Gil. I'm sorry, I didn't realize
Most people have no clue that in 2023, the best way to make money on Amazon is not.
No worries.
we're past the hour, but we got a few more minutes.
Okay. Let's see. What can I touch on? Have you seen any trial that raised hemoglobin?
So you're not going to answer the question about what people can expect to go wrong if they remove oats from their diet, Gil? You're just going to give us your opinion. Okay.
You will see any randomized trial.
No, not in a mixed diet. I have not seen
diet.
that.
Any diet.
Yeah. Well, I haven't. All the trials that I've seen that where they added oatmeal or did some kind of oatmeal intervention, it was in the context that these people were eating other foods as well. And so, no, I haven't seen one that showed a discrete and meaningful elevation in A1C.
Yeah. So I would just suggest to you that since we have dozens of trials looking at A1C.
So someone's A1C is the only metric that determines whether a food they're intaking is problematic or not. Absolutely fucking ridiculous, Gil Carvalho. Pathetic, desperate, ridiculous.
They show either no difference or a reduction, stating category.
There are no studies that inform us meaningfully one way or the other is the correct interpretation, Gil.
Categorically that A1C.
There are no studies of any validity that can inform on this question, whatever.
Is going to go up is strange to hold that belief. I think at least we should be cautious about that when the balance of evidence is categorically in the opposite direction.
No, there is no evidence to tap, Gil, still.
That's just my suggestion and how I go about it.
Yeah, but Gil, you're incompetent. So the way you go about things is not the correct way, scientifically.
I totally understand, and I appreciate your input.
That's very conciliatory. The correct response, Ken, was, Gil, you're an absolute fuckpot. You're a moron, and you've got no fucking idea whatsoever about science, have you, son?
Maybe, since we don't have a lot of time, maybe we can touch on blood pressure real quick, because that's something that's come up.
Oh, Jesus, now we're just scrabbling around, aren't we? This is really getting desperate.
Sure.
In the video, I'll try to go over this in 1 minute, and then I'll let you comment. In the video, the idea was oats will increase your blood pressure. If you have hypertension and you start eating oatmeal every day, keep an eye on your blood pressure, it's probably going to go up. So we went over the evidence base. We found dozens of trials measuring. Just to clarify, some trials add oatmeal to the diet. Many.
Right, so same fucking problems that we've already well and truly shown with the so-called existing literature about this question. It's absolute fucking garbage, all of it, Gil. None of it can inform on the question that you are now proposing. None of it.
They design entire diets, but the foods are similar for the two groups. It's the oats that are the variable. So
bollocks.
The other foods are not a confounder when we observe a difference in an outcome.
They're identical, are they? Between conditions. And it's a crossover trial, is it? Over what period of time? Under what level of control and observation, Gil? In what population of people? Of what size? Jesus Christ.
So I'll just finish this real quick. One meta-analysis of 21 randomized trials found an average a reduction of blood pressure on oats. This was explained by
not cause and effect.
People who had high blood pressure at baseline, or trials that compared it to refined grains. So when it's used in people with normal blood pressure, you tend to see no significant difference. Several trials look at, let me just conclude real quick.
Sure.
A couple of trials look at eggs versus oats, no significant effect on blood
all meaningless noise, Gil. None of that's science.
pressure on all of them that I've saw.
None of that's even closely akin to science. It's just rubbish. Come and try this bullshit with me, son. And we'll actually look at some papers. We'll actually bring them up on the screen and point exactly and precisely to where these problems are in all these studies. That would be a better use of everybody's time.
That I've seen. The summary we found 27 trials, majority no significant difference on oats versus no oats, 3 or 4 a reduction. We couldn't find one outlier where the blood pressure went up. So my question is, have you seen any randomized trial where oats raised blood pressure?
Over what period of time, in what population of people, under what circumstances, under what level of control and observation, with what scientific rigor?
So I haven't seen any trials that show that oatmeal raises blood pressure to any significant degree. And I'll explain to you what I mean in my video.
And neither have you seen any studies that show it doesn't, Ken, because neither posit can be supported by anything that is currently extant in the published literature. It will not, cannot inform on this question. It is theologically based claptrap, all of it.
So anytime you eat a food that causes a blood sugar excursion, that is going to cause a corresponding insulin elevation. And when you're eating, when you've seen that video and you think oatmeal, oh man, oatmeal is good for me, so I'm gonna have oatmeal for breakfast, then I'm gonna have oatmeal granola for snack, and then I'm gonna have an oat bar for lunch. And you're doing this constantly, you're going to wind up with something that many doctors don't know about, hyperinsulinemia. And one of the many things that hyperinsulinemia causes is it causes fluid retention. And this is why all the research came out saying, oh, salt will make your blood pressure go up. It is because in the context of hyperinsulinemia, yes, indeed, it will make it go up 2 or 3 points. That's what the research shows. But if you're constantly hyperinsulinemic from eating the oats, you're going to retain fluid. And so this is physiology, and it's also just mechanics. If you have more fluid in the system, your blood pressure is going to go up. That's just how the human body works. And so I'm not surprised that the randomized controlled trials and the meta-analysis.
Because the two words used inappropriately in such trials, Ken, are randomized and controlled, because none of those studies are anything of the sort. Still.
Such don't show that. Back to my previous statement that it's almost impossible to do meaningful nutrition research.
Strike the word almost. It is impossible to do.
And I think the vast majority of modern nutrition research is junk.
All of it, not just the majority, Ken. All of it is garbage.
And that's why, because we know in human physiology, and I was a biologist before I was a doctor, so I was studying physiology before it was human physiology. it's just known how the mammalian body works. If you're hyperinsulinemic, you're going to retain fluid. If you retain fluid, your blood pressure is going to go up unless you're third spacing a ton of that fluid. And so it's a physiological principle that I was talking about there. I wasn't basing that on randomized controlled trials
because none exist still
in nutrition research, which may or may not have been funded by somebody who had a vested interest in the outcome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. There's an interesting thing that I would like to touch on, which is you had this idea based on physiology, and then the conclusion that therefore blood pressure is going to go up. My question is, with 27 trials,
all rubbish, none of them able to inform on the posit, therefore, still, Gil, your evidence, so-called, is unacceptable. It is not of a standard that can inform on the question. Still.
Conducted, not one shows an increase in blood pressure.
Not one shows anything at all of utility, veracity, or correctness. It is all theological garbage that is bought and paid for, as Ken has already clearly established. Correctly so.
Don't you think that's a little strange to hold the belief that...
Not at all. What's strange, Gil, is for you to hold the belief that any of these studies that purport to be controlled and randomized are in fact controlled or randomized, because they're fucking not. Neither are they powered adequately, nor of an adequate tenure to give us an idea about anything. They are theological claptrap put together by people whose careers are based on publishing something, whether it's of utility or not. Okay?
Eating oatmeal is going to raise your blood pressure. Shouldn't we be able to see that in at least a couple of outliers?
Yeah.
No, because the statement is all else being equal and controlled. And no studies have looked at that still.
And I wish that I believed that modern nutrition research was the holy grail.
Which it isn't.
That many people think it is.
Including Gil, because he's incompetent and doesn't know the first thing about science, clearly.
I'll tell you this, Gil. I work with lots of different scientists in different genres. Nutrition research in humans, and this is not true for all nutrition research. If it's veterinary nutrition research for bovine or porcine or equine, they've got it down to a science. It is known what you should feed a goat or a cow or a pig. There's no question. But when it comes to human nutrition research, we don't know. We need more research.
It's because you can't do the kind of research that you need to answer those questions on humans. It's not practical from a organization standpoint. It's not practical financially. And ethics committees fucking hate it. They will not allow experimentation, scientific experimentation, to be done on human beings. Okay?
So when you
nutrition research, well, let me finish this, and then I'll definitely
shut the fuck up, Gil, and let him finish.
Answer your question. Human nutrition research is looked at by other scientific disciplines as the stepchild of science. Like everybody laughs at human nutrition research. And
correct, and rightly so.
I don't mean to be disrespectful.
Why not, Ken? It's entirely indicated that you are, because the entire field is absolute errant pap. It's garbage, all of it.
Because I've read a lot. I've read so much human nutrition research. I think there's some very good human nutrition research.
Well, perhaps you and I should have a discussion sooner rather than later, Ken, because I haven't.
I have Ansel Keys, the 3-volume set on his starvation studies. I've literally engulfed this stuff. But it's the laughingstock of scientific research, because it's just so uncontrollable.
Well, the only people not laughing are the epidemiologists, and that's because even the nutrition scientists are laughing at them.
When you find a tiny benefit or a tiny detriment, then you write up a paper, and then that becomes, oh, look, there's 21 trials that all show this same thing.
Yeah, but the same nothing is still nothing, isn't it?
Like, yeah, okay, I concede. You're right. That's what the modern nutrition research shows.
You don't think that if the problem was low quality, we would see a scatter. And when we see trials comparing eggs to oats, and we have at least 3 or 4 or 5.
You're only going to see a scatter, Gil, if the industry research funding was not a factor. You're not going to see that scattering because the funding comes typically from the same places who want the same outcomes. And so the researchers manipulate, massage their data to suit that funding source so that they can go back to that same funding source and ask for some more money for the next study. Fucking idiot.
5 of these that
I mean, this alone should make it absolutely clear and make it absolutely without any doubt whatsoever that Gil Carvalho has never in his life been involved in any meaningful way in actual research. It's incredible that he thinks himself remotely competent to speak on this topic. It's arrogance beyond belief, actually.
I've seen, all funded by the Egg Board, and we don't see blood pressure go up on oats in one of these trials. You don't think that it's strange to hold the belief that oats will definitely raise our blood pressure?
Or maybe they chose oats because they thought, well, oats will probably be worse than eggs, making eggs look better. And they didn't quite find that because they didn't control adequately, have a large enough sample size, any of that stuff, and it didn't work for them, but they still published the data saying, well, at least it shows that porridge is not worse than eggs, or eggs are not worse than porridge. Because everyone knows that porridge is good for you because, well, there's been some good marketing to tell everyone that that's the case, even though it isn't. Think of that? No? Okay.
Definitely, even though we don't have a single trial that will support that.
I don't know if I said definitely or not. I may have. I can't remember.
Oats will
but yeah. I'm sorry?
Oats will increase your blood pressure, is the quote from the video.
Yeah.
Actually, the original quote is longer. It says oats raise triglycerides, which will raise your insulin, which will raise your blood pressure. Then a little bit later, the video says if you already have high blood pressure, it'll probably go up more. So there's 2 statements. One, that it will raise blood pressure, and another that it probably will.
And so I stand by the physiological principles that I used to make that video. I'm not surprised.
Quite right, because all Ken can do is talk about what is likely in the average person. Of course.
That the modern nutrition research disagrees with that. That really doesn't surprise me at all. But I base that on physiological principles, not modern nutrition research.
I'll make
cool, because modern nutrition research is garbage, as we've covered.
one last point, and then I'll let you conclude or make your final remarks, and then we'll wrap up. I know you have to go. The problem with the mechanistic argument is like, for example, this will cause insulin to go up. This will cause liquid retention. Blood pressure should go up. Is we can always come up with a mechanism in any direction. In fact, with oats, we could come up with a mechanistic argument that has some support that would argue that the blood pressure would come down. For example, with beta glucan, that has been shown to have these types of effects.
Right.
So we could argue in any direction with any food. The way we know the net effect of all these mechanisms is by actually testing the health effect of a food in human beings.
Well, good luck doing such a test, Gil. Still.
Ideally in randomized trials.
Right, well, there's your problem.
And doing it many times and seeing what the balance of evidence is.
Right, well, there isn't any evidence existing at this time that can inform one way or the other on the question.
That's why that has more weight in hierarchy of evidence.
The hierarchy of evidence is a self-defeating opinion statement, precisely because it says that opinions are at the bottom of the hierarchy, the hierarchy itself being an opinion. You absolute imbecile, Gil Carvalho. You complete fuck trumpet.
Then speculating based on a mechanism. So I'll leave it at
that. I respect your opinion, Gil.
Why do you respect his opinion? For what reason, Ken, would you respect the opinion of an imbecile with no background in the field whatsoever, who is just mindlessly regurgitating patently ridiculous nonsense. For what reason?
And that's why what I would recommend to everybody watching this is make sure you have a good quality blood pressure cuff.
No one seems to know this, but Amazon actually has a $50 million fund that they have to pay.
And try a dietary intervention and see what it does with your own personal physiology. Get a continuous glucose monitor and do your own dietary trial, because here's the beauty of that. You're 100% sure that there's no perverse incentive. There's nobody that's funded that study. That's just you and your data. And so you're not going to be misled by anybody if you do that. And I have great respect for Gil.
Why?
I think he's doing great work.
Why? He's not. He's misleading people in a criminally misanthropic way, Ken. It's disgraceful and it should stop.
I've watched many of his YouTube videos. I don't want anybody watching this to think that in any way I was being disrespectful or negative. I think Gil's doing great work.
Why? Explain why you think he's doing good work, Ken.
And I have great hope for Gil, that because he is digging so deep into the research.
But he's clearly not, though, Ken. He clearly doesn't understand the first premises of it. And he is theologically espousing the same ridiculous claptrap as all these other vegetarded fuckwits.
And that also he's digging into the archaeology and anthropology. And I love that
he's clearly not doing that either.
Doing that because what's going to happen is that Gil and I together on this journey, we're going to rediscover what the proper human diet actually is.
Right, so it's meat and animal fat still. Good.
And I've had many conversations like this, and then somebody come back 3, 5, 7 years later and say, wow, I did not realize. And so thanks so much, Gil, for having me on. I greatly appreciate it, this opportunity to be able to discuss this with you instead of you just doing a SmackDown video, which I know sometimes you can't help but do that if you can't get in contact with people. But I love your work.
Or if people are also terrified of you that they will not face you for a discussion to deal with the objective facts, the objective reality in which we find ourselves, Ken.
I have great respect, and I appreciate you having me on.
I really thank you on behalf of the viewers and on my behalf for coming on and for having a great back and forth, very respectful and on our different views. And we went over the evidence on some topics.
Respect is earned, Gil. It's not something that people should expect as a default necessarily. You need to earn it, and you're nowhere close.
Probably 10 times more data on other things that you brought up in the video.
You don't have shit on fuck, Gil. You're an imbecile who does not understand how poor the human nutrition science is, clearly. You think it's valid, any of it, and you're wrong.
Video, but of course, we don't have time for everything. Maybe some other time we can go over.
Yeah, we'll do a round 2 in the future. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, quick summary of everything we talked about and my takeaways.
And my corrections of what he's about to get wrong, I suspect.
We both agreed that paleoanthropology is a fascinating topic to learn about. We disagreed a bit on what role it plays for dietary decisions in
So what? You didn't actually give us any grist there.
2024. Dr. Berry believes it is a central factor. I do not. I think...
Why not, Gil? Is evolution not a thing?
It can give us ideas of things to test, but ultimately giving a food to a human being and observing and measuring the effect, for me, trumps any ancestor diet idea.
Right, so Ken actually said that what they should do, individual people, is do exactly that. Test on themselves to see what their responses are to various foods. And he's right, they should, because they should not rely on what you're referring to as human nutrition science, because it's nothing remotely akin to science still.
We also agreed that in a normal, healthy individual, a glucose excursion or a glucose spike after a meal or after intense exercise is not a concern. It's normal.
Right. For any given individual, any one spike or diversion away from the normal baseline glucose level is not necessarily a problem. Correct. Nobody said otherwise.
Physiology, at least up to a certain level, and that's an important takeaway. We disagreed on the exact cutoff where we start worrying?
Because there isn't one. Thresholds are not a thing that's relevant to human metabolism, only to the allopathic medicinal community, etc., and to science at large. Dichotomous, positivistic, yes or no answers to questions. It's not appropriate because grey exists.
Dr. Berry worries if his glucose goes past 130 at any point. I don't.
I don't think he said 130. I think he said 140.
Based on the evidence I've seen, I am not worried if my glucose goes above 130, 140, 150.
Neither would I be on any one given occasion, but if I was doing that every day, or several times every day of my stupid life, then I would have something to worry about.
Even higher after a meal, as long as by the 2-hour mark, it's not abnormal.
According to whom, on the basis of what?
If at any point it goes much higher, maybe 190 or 200, and it's not an isolated occurrence, I would look into it. Otherwise, glucose spike after a meal of 140, 150, even higher, normal physiology, I'm not worried. We also agreed that in
How often should that occur, Gil?
individuals with abnormal glucose response,
There's nobody with an abnormal glucose response. The glucose response is encoded for by the metabolism, which is encoded for by the genes, those genes having survived at least 3,800 million years, probably a lot longer than that. Actually, those genes knowing exactly what they're doing, in fact. It is normal.
diabetes or prediabetes,
Diabetes and so-called prediabetes, both of which should actually get at that, both of those things are normal physiological function in a person who takes in a toxic load chronically of glucose. It's not abnormal, it's not a pathology, it's normal and it's normal functioning. It should occur. What should not occur is the poisoning in the first place, the intake of the carbohydrates. Still.
pausing foods that cause abnormal spikes, abnormally high or
Why not knock them the fuck off, Gil? Why not do that?
abnormally long can be a reasonable strategy. I'm
So can knocking them the fuck off permanently.
even open to that argument for people with normal glucose response,
All people's glucose response is normal, Gil, still. I've already covered that.
but who have abnormal insulin response.
But again, same deal. No, we don't. No.
People with insulin resistance, but who don't have prediabetes yet.
Insulin resistance and prediabetes are both constructs, still.
An argument could be made there.
Yes, but making arguments actually doesn't necessarily mean that the arguments that you've made are correct, valid, robust, and utilitarian to people in any way, because they're not, Gil. You're an imbecile, you're out of your depth, and you have no fucking idea what you're talking about whatsoever. As such, you should stop permanently from commenting publicly about such things.
As long as we don't lose sight of the number one priority, which is to fix the root cause.
Right, which is, in the case of diabetes, prediabetes, so-called, metabolic syndrome, so-called, obesity, so-called, all of those things, Gil, the underlying etiology of all of those things is the pouring of contraindicated, unnecessary, toxic carbohydrates down one's stupid fucking neck. Period. The way to resolve the situation is to stop fucking doing that. Still.
Which in most people can be achieved with some weight loss. Dr. Berry also brought up undiagnosed diabetes, which is a great question. It's a real problem. It's rampant. Of course, we have to be consistent. There's a lot of undiagnosed diabetes, undiagnosed prediabetes, insulin resistance. There's also a lot of undiagnosed high blood pressure, hypercholesterolemia, and heart disease.
No, hypercholesterolemia is not a pathology. Not at all. Rubbish, Gil.
So we got to find solutions that help people at every aspect of their health and not one metric in a vacuum. We also agreed that clarifying exaggeration has value. If influencers out there are saying that oats are a perfect food that solves every disease, explaining that for some people adding oats might be a good idea.
No, there are no people for whom adding oats will be a good idea.
For others, pausing oats may make more sense.
No, knocking them the fuck off entirely is what's indicated because they're a carbohydrate. And exogenous carbohydrates are contraindicated and unnecessary still.
Provided we don't start doing the exact thing we're trying to fight. Influencers exaggerate to one side, so we go and we exaggerate to the other. The public is just confused. Person with
Well, only the stupid ones, Gil.
diabetes, massive spikes on oats, so they switch to Greek yogurt and berries for breakfast instead. Reasonable strategy.
No, it isn't.
Person with good glucose, but their cholesterol and their blood pressure
Cholesterol is still irrelevant.
are too high. So they add some
No, there is no such thing as too high cholesterol. Rubbish.
oats, and those metrics improve. Reasonable
According to whom, on the basis of what?
strategy. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter. We also disagreed on specific effects of oatmeal. For example, Dr. Berry is of the view that oatmeal will probably raise blood pressure.
At some point, if you eat enough of it, yes, it will. I agree with Ken on that.
I searched systematically, and human trials, if anything,
Human trials are unable to inform on this question whatsoever, Gil. You wasted your time.
are pointing in the opposite direction.
No, they're not. They're not pointing in any direction whatsoever. They are invalid, postulous, excremental wastes of paper upon which they would be written if you bothered to print them out. Still.
People with high blood pressure, oats may actually help reduce it. We
See the thing about the word may there, Gil? It leaves maybe not too entirely on the table. Good.
also agreed that neither of us has seen a trial where blood pressure went up on oats.
So what?
And we actually figured out why we have different views on some of these questions.
Did you?
This is the value of these.
One of you is a competent allopathic medicinal professional with the correct approach to suggesting to people what the ideal human diet is likely to be, and the other one is you, Gil Carvalho. That's probably what the difference is, I would surmise.
Conversations. It's not just opinion versus opinion. It's trying to understand what evidence each view sits on. Dr.
Right. Well, yours sits on none whatsoever.
Berry based his view on a physiological process. Higher insulin secretion should cause liquid retention, which should raise blood pressure.
And that would be the tendency over time as you ate enough carbohydrates of whatever kind, those being contraindicated and unnecessary. At some point in the life, that is the likelihood, but n equals 1 for any given person. Well, people's mileage varies on all sorts of things, don't they, Gil?
I tried to explain that this thought process will often get things wrong because
so does the thought process, Gil, that you undertake, believing that any of this absolute fucking nonsense published in the literature about human nutrition is of any value, utility, robustness, or veracity of any kind whatever. You are sadly mistaken on that, and you are also utterly incompetent, as I've said.
we can always find another physiological process for any food that goes in any direction we want. In my view, it's the actual measurement in
Yeah, but none has been undertaken still. You fucking idiot.
Human beings after eating the food that is most likely to give us the correct answer. And since that has been done,
It hasn't been done still.
27 times in
It hasn't been done once, let alone 27 times. Bring me those 27 articles, Gil, and we'll go through each one individually if that's necessary for me to prove my point that not one of them is valid. It has not been measured scientifically. Stop fucking lying.
independently,
Well, it's probably not lying, Gil. It's probably that you are that destitute of scientific competence that you actually think any one of these studies has any validity or robustness at all. You ridiculous buffoon.
for me, that's the most likely effect.
Well, you're wrong.
Bear in mind that anecdotally, it's possible for me to drop my blood pressure, and yet I'm eating less oats than I used to if a bunch of other things change.
So fucking what?
For example, if I lose weight, weight loss tends to improve blood pressure.
Of course it does, because of the back pressure issue.
So that doesn't mean it was reducing the oats that did it. This is why
That's right.
when we want to know the effect of one food, we run clinical trials where we
But we don't, though. We run pseudo-clinical trials that are close enough to get past some peer reviewers so we can get a thing published in the literature and use words like possibly, maybe, and probably at the end of our conclusion statements, misrepresent our data set in the first place. It's just absolute fucking nonsense, Gil. Grow up, son.
have fewer variables. We also had slightly different views on the role of funding. In my opinion, funding concerns go both ways, although I think we ended up
Of course they do.
agreeing on that. So funding may skew one study in favor of oats, another study against oats.
Right, but none of those studies have any power to inform anyone with any scientific nous or competence on any topic whatsoever, because all of us, those of us who are competent as scientists, will look at these studies and laugh our tits off. You ridiculous buffoon.
So what we do is we look at a number of studies done by different people
all of which are shit.
different funding sources, and
All of which are shit,
we look for a consistent direction of effect.
which we don't find. Because we don't find anything that we can report on with any confidence because they're all shit still.
So that's what I tried to do. Same
Well, you failed.
with research quality concerns, exactly the same logic. With an isolated study, absolutely. There could be a kink, maybe one group.
Okay. All studies are shit still. A pile of shit, Gil, isn't better. It's just a bigger pile of shit.
Ate some other food that skewed the results. Always possible. But by the time that we have dozens of studies,
But we don't have any studies still that can inform reliably and scientifically on the question because of confounds, covariates, collinearities, insufficient power, insufficient control, insufficient observation, all the things that render these studies impotent. And as such, invoking any of these studies at all only points to your destitution of comprehension of science, Gil Carvalho. Come and face me face to face, bring your studies, and we will dissect your studies like you kept threatening to do today and didn't fucking do. Come and try that with me, son. I'm waiting for your email.
looking at the same thing, finding a consistent direction of effect, and not one finds the thing that I thought was going to happen.
Or the other. No studies in that field can inform on the likely outcomes in any way, shape, or form because all of those studies have the same flaws and faults, you buffoon. Still.
I personally changed my views. And finally, Dr. Berry suggested that everybody keep an eye on their own blood pressure and blood work and their metrics, and I agree 100%. Overall, I think this was a fascinating conversation. I think anyone can learn something from this. I know I did. Should we do a part 2? Let me know below if you want to see.
Yes, come and talk to me, Gil, about science. Bring your science with you. We can choose the exact topic about any aspect of health and nutrition because absolutely everything I've ever seen you put together on anything related to these topics has been farcical, laughable, and wrong. Demonstrably so. All right, there's the challenge. Come and have a word with. I'll be polite to you, Gil. I will, but if you say something that's garbage, I will point to it and say that's garbage, Gil, and here's why. You won't have a fucking leg to stand on. See you then, or not. Right, for the rest of you, you know how it is. Hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Share this out to your feeds so that it gets some exposure because YouTube won't help me in that regard. And Ken Berry, I am waiting for you to email me to invite me to appear on your channel to discuss science or whatever you want to, really, for you to do more to help me to promote my channel. Thanks, Ken. I'll look forward to that. Right, see you later. Ciao for now.